serious? What is the best unexplained mystery? The Great Attractor. Fizz web page. It's a supermassive something, not a black hole, by the way, which is inexorably dragging everything nearby, including the entire Milky Way galaxy, towards it. Nobody knows what it is, though it's been theorized to be an incredibly dense cluster of galaxies, equating to the better part of 100,000 Milky Ways. Edit. This comment, along with 26 others, has been reposted on thoughtcatalog.com without my, or the other posters, permission. 27 disturbing unexplained mysteries, and murders, that just don't add up. Thought Catalog webpage. Reddit comments and posts, by default, are copyright of the users who posted them, with some special rights on their usage going to Reddit. This is a serious copyright infringement. The murder of Julia Wallace. Wallace, aged 52, attended a meeting of the Liverpool Central Chess Club on the evening of Monday the 19th of January 1931, to play a scheduled chess game. While there he was handed a message, which had been received by telephone about 25 minutes before he arrived. It requested that he call at an address at 25 Menlove Gardens East, Liverpool, at 7:30 p.m. the following evening to discuss insurance with a man who had given his name as R.M. Qualtrough. The next night Wallace duly made his way by tramcar to the south of the city at the time requested, only to discover that while there were Menlove Gardens north, south and west, there was no east. Wallace made inquiries in a nearby newsagent and also spoke to a policeman on his beat, but nobody he asked was able to help him in his search for the address or the mysterious Qualtrough. He also called at 25 Menlove Gardens West, and asked several other passers-by in the neighborhood for directions, but to no avail. After searching the district for about 45 minutes he returned home. His next-door neighbors, the Johnstons, who were going out for the evening, encountered Wallace in the alley, complaining that he could not gain entry to his home at either the front or the back. While they watched, Wallace tried the back door again, which now opened. Inside he found his wife Julia had been brutally beaten to death in their sitting room. Up to his arrest 2 weeks later, Wallace made 2 voluntary statements but was never intensively questioned by the police, although he was required to attend SID headquarters every day and was asked specific questions about whether the Wallaces had had a maid, why he had asked the man who had taken the telephone message at the chess club to be specific about the time he took it, and whether he had spoken to anyone in the street on his way back to his house from his abortive attempt to find Mr. Qualtrough. The police had evidence that the telephone box used by Qualtrough to make his call to the chess club was situated just 400 yards from Wallace's home. Although the person in the cafe who took the call was quite certain it was not Wallace on the other end of the line. Nevertheless, the police began to suspect that Qualtrough was William Herbert Wallace. Yet, even when they arrested and charged him, they did not ask him any further questions. The police were also convinced that it would have been possible for Wallace to murder his wife and still have time to arrive at the spot where he boarded his tram. This they attempted to prove by having a fit young detective go through the motions of the murder and then sprint all the way to the tram stop, something an ailing 52-year-old Wallace probably could not have accomplished. The original assessment of the time of death, around 8 p.m., was also later changed to just after 6:30 p.m., although there was now additional evidence on which to base the earlier timing. Forensic examination of the crime scene had revealed that Julia Wallace's attacker was likely to have been heavily contaminated with her blood, given the brutal and frenzied nature of the assault. Wallace's suit, which he had been wearing on the night of the murder, was examined closely but no trace of blood staining was found. The police formed the theory that a Macintosh, which was inexplicably found under Julia's corpse, had been used by a naked Wallace to shield himself from blood spatter while committing the crime. Examination of the bath and drains revealed that they had not been recently used, and there was no trace of blood there either, apart from a single tiny clot in the toilet pan, the origin of which could not be established. Source: Wikipedia. Honestly, this sounds like a case of someone with power pulling strings and getting Wallace arrested, or just really incompetent and lazy police work. I think the real mystery behind this is why the hell the police were so determined to take Wallace to jail. In a lot of cases where people are later proven innocent of crimes they've been convicted of, you find that the police form a theory of who the culprit is early on and then stretch tenuous evidence and ignore exculpatory evidence to bring them in. Confirmation bias. Probably my favorite unsolved mystery is the Ellen Moore Lighthouse mystery. Basically, the 3 lighthouse keepers disappeared from the island. Inside the lighthouse they found uneaten meals on the table and missing coats among other weird things. The creepy part is the logbook. It's supposed to be used strictly for logging work-related entries, but they started using it as a sort of journal diary. It was explained in the logbook how there was a terrible storm that was lasting for many days and that one of the keepers, an old, weathered seaman, was crying in fear. The last entry said that the storm had ended and everything was calm and fine. A neighboring island reported that there was never a storm. The wiki entry, Wikipedia webpage, seems to back up the storm theory, with evidence detailing wave damage 110 feet above normal levels. A contemporary account by the 4th relief keeper who initially found his colleagues to be missing explicitly states that old cutlery and crockery from the last meal had been cleaned and put away. A lot of myth and legend has been attached to the story. When the solution seems to have been determined fairly soon afterwards, they were swept away by exceptionally heavy and high seas, whilst trying to secure equipment on the West Key. Archaeology is nothing but mystery. One of my favorites is the Chauvet cave paintings. If you've never seen Werner Herzog's documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams about Chauvet, please do. They appear to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, cave paintings our species made. Around 30,000 years ago. They were made more than 10,000 years before the cave paintings at Lascaux. Although there are strong stylistic similarities between the two sites, we don't know who made them and why. It's interesting thinking about the decisions they made. For instance, most illustrations are made in profile. There are no human figures except for the sorcerer image of a bull appearing to embrace or merge with the naked lower half of a woman, which is a unique image in style and content. The vulva is forward facing and some of the pubic triangle was erased to draw the sorcerer bull, whereas in the rest of the cave figures are drawn overlapping each other quite constantly, and the artists appeared to have no problem with that. What did this mean? They were also accomplished artists with understanding of anatomical placement and shading and movement. There's even an image of a bull with 3 heads and lines of motion over them, appearing to represent a bull tossing its head. Humanity's first attempt at cartooning. But everywhere we see sweeping confidence in the linnet, which was done in what looks to be a singular stroke. Yet there appear to be very few, if any, mistakes anywhere in the cave. Maybe a false start on a horse's hind that had to be redrawn. But that's it. If you want to know how hard that is, try drawing like that on the wall in chalk. You can go as far as to buy a Wacom tablet, turn on the brush stabilizer, and go to town. There aren't any erasures of a botched drawing, just the intentional blurry gray rub on the sorcerer image, which leaves serious artifacts. If they had erased any of it, we would know. They're also stylistically identical, although we know they weren't made by the same person. More on that later again. If you want to know how hard that is, While your art supplies are out, go ahead and draw Bart Simpson. A French artist released a book that the rest of the French hated, but I probably didn't have to tell you that, suggesting they were traced from models held in front of a torch. But where are the models? How did we make such sophisticated templates to begin with? And how did we get so unconditionally flawless at tracing them and then coloring in the eyes, muzzles, and muscle textures within the borders? Well, there are lots of ways to get good at art. That's just food for thought. It isn't the mystery. The mystery is that the cave had two distinct periods of use. The first, when most of the paintings are made, was thousands years before the second. So at one point in time, the cave's use in rituals, or even something like record keeping, were halted and abandoned. But then thousands of years later human beings returned to the cave and began making the exact same paintings in the exact same way. Then they too abandoned the cave, with a couple of scant signs of use by what were essentially drifters, people occupying the cave and using it as a temporary or permanent shelter for a brief period of time. The artists had never lived in there and went into the cave only to paint, or in a word, people who happened to stumble across it. The last person to ever see the cave for thousands of years was a boy in stride with a domesticated wolf, who appears to have been exploring with a torch. Their footprints are still on the ground in Chauvet. Interestingly, the child's footprints led to the back of the cave, but never out again. More likely than not, it was because there was an exit there that was covered up later by a rockslide or some other geological event, right? I wasn't sure what to expect, but when I googled the paintings, Chauvet cave paintings, Google search web page, I was surprised. They're very beautiful. I don't know if you saw, but you can actually visit the whole cave online. Culture web page. I was actually looking at it and my colleague asked me what game it was, since it's a 360-degree view and you can zoom in and see a lot of details. It's amazing. I'm happy OP mentioned that cave that I didn't know about. But what's weird to me is the animals they painted. Horses. Sure, I'm sure they saw those. Bears too. Mountain lions. Probably. Wolves, sure. But rhinoceros? If you look at those pictures, that is very clearly a rhino. Were there rhinos in prehistoric Europe? There were. The species depicted is the extinct woolly rhinoceros, which was still alive in France at the time. Also, those lions are cave lions, also extinct. One of many reasons why this cave is so interesting to me is that apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, there was debate in the paleontology community over whether male cave lions had manes or not. When the cave was discovered, they found a painting of a male and female cave lion and the male had a visible scrotum. So we were able to learn that they definitively did not have manes because of the record left by these prehistoric people. The males apparently could have a bit of a rough, though. Super interesting. Thank you. The footprints part specifically is amazing. That they are still preserved there. However, how are geologists not able to determine whether there was a rockslide or other geological event? I guess I'd need to see photos of the area in question to understand. As a layman, I am always skeptical about how such details are known to archaeologists about things that happened thousands of years ago. But whenever I get really deep into the evidence provided, it seems to stack up. Often there are some assumptions at play, but carbon dating and other metrics for determining age don't lie. The results are asking big questions on their own. The geology of the area, the Ardèche Gorge, is limestone karst, and so the area is riddled with caves. It's possible that a collapsed entrance could now be covered with calcite concretions, making it appear to blend in with the rest of the cave wall. But that's just a guess. I'm always fascinated by the Chowvat Cave, as I was living a matter of 300-400 m away from its entrance the year it was discovered. I remember there being quiet rumors going round about its discovery, and some speculation about where it was. The disappearance of Kyron Horman. Wikipedia webpage. Kyron, 9 years old in 2010, was allegedly dropped off at school by his stepmom but never made it to his first class. They never found any evidence of him and never charged the stepmother. For some reason this story totally upsets me. The encephalitis lethargica epidemic that struck between 1915 to 1926. No one knows why it happened, nor has there been a recurrence since the initial outbreak. From Wikipedia. Wikipedia webpage. The disease attacks the brain, leaving some victims in a statue-like condition, speechless and motionless. Between 1915 and 1926, an epidemic of encephalitis lethargica spread around the world. Nearly 5 million people were affected, a third of whom died in the acute stages. Many of those who survived never returned to their pre-existing aliveness. They would be conscious and aware yet not fully awake. They would sit motionless and speechless all day in their chairs, totally lacking energy, impetus, initiative, motive, appetite, affect or desire. They registered what went on about them without active attention, and with profound indifference. They neither conveyed nor felt a feeling of life. They were as insubstantial as ghosts, and as passive as zombies. Oliver Sacks did some research into this, and his book Awakenings is a fascinating and heartbreaking look into the long-lasting damage done by this disease. There's also a movie on his research with Robin Williams with the same name. My childhood friend one day woke up not knowing who or where he was. Turns out he had encephalitis and ended up making a full recovery despite the odds. Shit's crazy. I had encephalitis at 4 years old, was in a coma for a week and made a full recovery. Crazy for sure. Wow, that's crazy. I've never heard of such an epidemic, yet it's affected 5 million people. Of course there was other stuff going on at the time. The Crew Murders Wikipedia webpage is a pretty good one. A farming couple were murdered and their bodies were dumped in a river. After they were missing for a week, their home was searched and their still living baby daughter was found there. The wife's father was convicted of the crime, but later released when it was discovered that the detective inspectors in charge of investigating had falsified evidence to implicate him. The actual murderer has never been identified. What makes it interesting is that doctors believe that during the week her parents were at the bottom of the river weighted down with car parts. Someone was regularly feeding the baby. Just because he was released because of falsified evidence doesn't mean it still wasn't him. I wonder if they questioned the sister. She had just been disinherited. She would have a familial connection to the baby. So the monarch butterfly migrates to Mexico and back every year. During the year there are a full 4 generations of butterflies that live and die during the journey. Upon returning back from Mexico, the butterfly manages to find the same trees its relative started out at despite never having been there. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Disappearance of Brandon Victor Swanson. Unresolved Mysteries webpage. In 2008 a teenager in Minnesota was driving to a friend's party when he crashed into a ditch. He called his dad to come pick him up, but his dad was unable to find him, despite being a long-time resident of the area. Eventually Brandon started walking and described what he saw as a city up the road that he was heading to. Abruptly, Brandon cussed and his phone went silent. His car was later found abandoned in the ditch as he had described, but no city could have been in the area where he was walking. To this day he is still missing. with little evidence found since. Edit. For everyone discussing drug use, his friends that night said that he had had one beer before leaving, but did not exhibit any signs of inebriation and was by all accounts acting sober. His parents have also said that he did not excessively drink and had never taken drugs. He was 19 at the time. I would love to see this solved because I'm just so curious as to what he was seeing. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he was tripping and ran into the wrong person or fell into a body of water, fell and hurt himself and died of exposure or something. If he was in a car crash, he could have gotten the head injury that caused him to see things. I don't tell this story often because it brings up painful memories, and honestly it's just not an all-around fun story. I'll do my best to shorten it and make it as light as possible because it's the reason I agree with the theory that it was a head injury hallucination. Growing up I had quite a few head injuries for various reasons, and my doctors warned my parents that if I had another concussion that it could do some serious, lasting damage. Of course, no one thought I would have another concussion, but obviously here wouldn't be a story if I hadn't. When I was 10 I was running around my house during a snowstorm because I was so bored. My mother was fed up and demanded that I go outside despite the temperature and weather. I did as I was told. While outside I slipped on some ice, smacked my head into a low-hanging branch and hit it again in the concrete ice. My head was split open on both sides. I don't remember the pain or anything. The next thing I remember is sitting up and looking around. To this day I swear I thought I had teleported somewhere. There was a shimmery field all around me. It looked like autumn instead of winter. There were big trees with thousands of fire-colored leaves and the sun was low in the sky. I saw what looked like a large river just barely in sight. I thought I could hear it too. Then everything went black. When I woke up I was in the air and my father was talking to me softly as I opened my eyes. He had found me on his walk home. We lived in a house that was walking distance for the hospital he worked at the time. Maybe he really saw us sitting, maybe I really saw the field. But I don't doubt that if he hit his head hard enough he could have seen something like that. It makes me sad to think that he was injured and that someone might have taken advantage of him, or he might have fallen into a worse situation. Sorry I tried to make it short and not annoying. I just wanted to back up my thoughts on it with a personal anecdote. This is a really cool story. May I ask if you've suffered any long-term effects from your many concussions? I have epilepsy. I'm not sure if it's related, but the doctors think it could be. My mother has it as well, but hers was trauma-induced, so it's doubtful I inherited it, unless I inherited the predisposition of getting trauma-induced epilepsy. I have pretty terrible vision as well, but again, that's hard to directly link to anything. I also have a greater chance of getting Alzheimer's when I'm older apparently. Edit. Because I forgot and I thought it was interesting. I've looked into this a lot out of fear of possibly having larger problems. There is a chance if anyone has concussions while growing up or at any point in their lives that they will have severe problems as they age. For example, football players and boxers who gradually lose their minds and become severely suicidal and aggressive. It's why I often think we should be more careful in what we let out young athletes do. Cheerleaders and gymnasts often get concussions in high school and it can be overlooked as it's not considered as serious as other sports. I'm not saying that's true. They are very serious sports. It concerns me that my mental health problems might be linked to the injuries. I can't confirm those connections until science can. But I do often think that my depression is linked. I'm not a professional or a doctor or a scientist though, so take my thoughts on it with a grain of salt. Sorry to ramble again. Not rambling at all. Thank you for your personal experience. That's what truly makes me come back to this site day after day. The disappearance of Nicholas Barclay Frederick Borden. In 1994, San Antonio, Texas, 13-year-old Nicholas Barclay disappeared from his home 3 years later. Barclay was found huddled next to a phone booth halfway across the world in Linares, Spain. Authorities picked him up and reunited him with his family. However, certain things didn't add up. Barclay had very little memory of what happened to him, and couldn't give police a real answer as to how he ended up in Spain. Plus, his English was terrible, and when he did speak English it was with a heavy accent. This doesn't make sense for someone who spent the first 13 years of his life in the United States. But these discrepancies were explained away by the fact that Barclay was probably just coping with the emotional trauma of being kidnapped to a foreign country and kept away from his family for 3 years. One thing no one could explain though, was that when Nicholas returned to the United States, his eyes were a different color than when he originally disappeared. Barclay tried to resume a normal life, enrolling back into his old school, moving back in with his family, etc. About 4 months after reuniting with his family, a private investigator discovered that Nicholas Barclay actually wasn't Barclay, but a con artist named Frederick Borden. Borden was wanted by Interpol because he had a habit of stealing the identity of missing youths. Borden was arrested, but this brought about even more disturbing questions about Nicholas's disappearance. Apparently, Nicholas was a very unruly and problematic child. He was always getting into trouble at school, and there were several police reports from his family's house about domestic disturbances and arguments that worsened in the months before he went missing. Nicholas's mom moved her brother into their house, Nicholas's uncle, shortly before he disappeared to help give Nicholas some structure. It is rumored that he couldn't handle Nicholas and instead killed him. This would explain why the family was so willing to accept someone who wasn't their son as their lost boy. If it was believed that Nicholas was alive, any murder investigation would come to a halt. Even more interesting, after Borden was arrested, police began reopening and investigating the case. Nicholas's uncle promptly killed himself. I scrolled all the way down because I couldn't believe nobody mentioned this one. It was totally the family that killed him. If you look at pictures and videos, Borden looked nothing like Nicholas. The family was obviously going along with it so they could get away with the murder. Plus, when the police wanted to do DNA testing, the family totally refused and wouldn't listen to anyone who tried to tell them he wasn't their son. There's a documentary on Netflix, or at least there used to be, narrated by Borden called The Imposter, I think. Really interesting. Narrated by Borden, the guy pretending to be the kid. Holy shit. Edit. Just watch the documentary. That was absolutely one of the best docs I've ever seen. Super recommend. Yep. He had realized at one point that this family totally knew he was not their son and were hiding something. Dying. Wanted by Interpol and using a family, only to find out they're using you. Probably freaky as hell. Gotta double down on the lie everywhere you go, and no matter how deep you try to be, you know they know you're not their kid but they're lying too. That's a tangled web. That's friggin' twisted. And they killed their son, so why would they have any problem killing you? At least morally speaking. The fact they let a con artist knowingly live with them posing to be the deceased is probably a good sign they're too nervous to do it again. And they killed their son, so why would they have any problem killing you? At least morally speaking. Exactly. The fact they let a con artist knowingly live with them posing to be the deceased is probably a good sign they're too nervous to do it again. I hadn't really thought that through. Definitely protected a bit by the publicity. In Australia, in 2011, someone broke into a TV station and spent 4 hours flushing $100,000 down the toilet. It is mind-boggling. Why? This is the funniest mystery on here. Not disappearances, not rapes, not murders. Just one man flushing mad cash down the loo. I bet it was revenge against someone who knows exactly what they did. The Legends of Nahanni Valley. It's a valley in Nahanni National Park in the NW Territory in Canada. Very isolated and remote, largely unexplored, also known as Valley of the Headless Men. Many of the tribes in the area avoided it for thousands of years, believing it was an evil haunted place, inhabited by strange beings, spirits, etc. A violent tribe called the Naha was said to inhabit it, with large men and strange weapons. They liked to decapitate their victims. They mysteriously disappeared one day, never to be seen again. When the frontier men, miners, etc. started coming in, many mysteriously ended up decapitated. Others just disappeared. It's long had reports of strange lights, UFOs, cryptids, living fossils. Overall a strange place, and interesting to read about. The disappearance of Brian Schaffer. He was a 27-year-old medical student caught on camera entering but never leaving a bar in Columbus, Ohio. That area of town was a lot rougher back then, but it's still worth mentioning that it's a second-floor bar with only one real entrance exit. The building was getting renovations at the time, but it still would have been super hard to take someone, unnoticed, out of there against their will. Well, there were cameras covering the construction part of the bar from other buildings and he wasn't seen on those either. Wait until everyone leaves. Put the corpse in the fridge. Cut small pieces and put them in the garbage and take them out like regular garbage. It won't make anyone suspicious and eventually you will get rid of an entire body. Perfect crime. Ideally you drop the bags in dumpsters in locations that form a smiley face on a map. People are saying it was under construction. Could we have a case of a real-life cask of Amontillado? It was, but Schaffer's family was loaded and tore the place apart looking for him. Think his dad still hasn't given up. That area is pretty nice now but still gives me the creeps. I remember hearing about a disappearance like this and the guy was still in the bar. Got stuck in a tiny gap in the wall or something. Passed out and suffocated fairly quickly and wasn't found till years later. Can't believe no one noticed the smell. Wonder if something similar happened to this guy. I'd say the East Area Rapist original Night Stalker's identity is one of the craziest mysteries to me. He committed 40-50 rapes, around a dozen murders, called a few of his victims and still nothing is known about the guy. Edit 2 months later the East Area Rapist has been caught after almost 40 years, and his name is Joseph D'Angelo. The podcast Casa File has an amazing 5-part series on this. I still can't believe that they never found him. Makes you wonder if he actually stopped died, or just moved somewhere else and changed his MO. Chris Benoit's strange Wikipedia page. Edit and murder-suicide. Chris Benoit double murder and suicide. Wikipedia web page. Wikipedia controversy. Was a pro wrestler who murdered his wife and child in their home before committing suicide. 14 hours before this was discovered, a Wikipedia article noted he would be replaced by another wrestler in a match due to personal issues including the death of his wife. The article originally read, Chris Benoit was replaced by Johnny Nitro for the ECW World Championship match at Vengeance, as Benoit was not there due to personal issues stemming from the death of his wife Nancy. The phrase stemming from the death of his wife Nancy was added at 12:01 a.m. EDT on the 25th of June, 78, whereas the Fayette County Police reportedly discovered the bodies of the Benoit family at 2:30 p.m. EDT. 14 hours, 29 minutes later. However, Chris himself didn't edit the page. The police traced this edit back to Stamford, where WWE headquarters is located. There are other strange things in the case too, like the bottles of alcohol and steroid needles littered around the scene, but no alcohol or steroids being in Chris' body, or that Chris had been paranoid that someone was following him in the weeks up to the murder, and had repeatedly texted one of his closest friends his address, despite the fact he came over regularly to visit and knew where he lived, in the moments up to the murder. However, Chris himself didn't edit the page. The police traced this edit back to Stamford, where WWE headquarters is located. I never heard that aspect of it. I heard it was some idiot messing around and was just a coincidence of all coincidences he happened to do that right before the actual murder. Could still be a coincidence. But, man. Stanford of all places. I think Chris may have called and told them about his wife's death before he committed suicide. They just lied about it later. I think the likely explanation is that he called WWE to call out of work, either before or after killing her, explaining that his wife had died and he wasn't coming in. They don't ask questions. They don't assume foul play. They just find a replacement. Some intern updates the wiki page for some reason. But why? Why lie about it? Why not contact the police? And if you don't, why go edit Wikipedia? Yeah, but Chris was undoubtedly fucked in the head completely and having an emotional breakdown for a long while before the killings and suicide happened. He broke down after Eddie Guerrero died and couldn't handle his death at all. His parents and friends all say that he would talk about Eddie as if he was still alive, and he kept a private journal which had writings to Eddie and saying that he didn't want to live without his best friend alive, and the writing was also very poor grammatically, like on an elementary school level, which indicates his brain was very injured after all the concussions he suffered over his career. He had severe CTE. They said his brain was that of a dementia patient. He was also experiencing hallucinations, so I wouldn't give much credence to outside interference in this one. FBI most wanted cases are always fun to look at. Some of my favorites are Jason Derek Brown, former Mormon, partier, surfer, and chill type of guy, kills a security guard and runs off. Hasn't been seen since 2005ish except for a sighting in 2009. Robert William Fisher, former Marine, kills his family and blows up his house. Hasn't been seen since 2001. Last sign of him was his abandoned car and his dog. Nobody knows if he's still out in the woods or is just a pile of bones at this point. Donald Eugene Webb had been on the list for 26 years. You'd think he'd be all over the place, but he was really hidden by his wife and passed away in 1999 when his body was finally found in 2017. Not a FBI most wanted case, but John List managed to disappear after killing his family and created an entirely new identity and remarried before being caught after almost 18 years. Edit. Check out all top 10 most wanted FBI webpage. Also, another one is William Bradford Bishop, Jr., accomplished and smart former U.S. State Department Foreign Service worker, kills his whole family in 1976 and goes on the run ever since. Not spotted since 1994. He's 81 now though. Have you heard of the DuPont Elegant murders? A man murdered his wife and 3 children, buried them in the backyard, and vanished. He had cancelled the lease on their house, paid the children's school tuition in full, put a sign on the mailbox to return mail to sender, and sent text messages to one of his son's friends. When his friend asked him how he was, he had gone back home from the friend's house early because his father claimed his mother had been in a cycling accident. Just a pile of bones at this point. It's called a skeleton. buddy, we've all got them and it's nothing to be ashamed of. So I have a personal experience, sort of. My father had a co-worker who was a great guy, good at his work, fun to talk to, nobody had any complaints about him. He lived in an apartment right next to work, so the night watchman at the workplace would see him whenever he went out. So one night, he went out in his pajamas, talking on his cell phone, nodded at the watchman. The watchman didn't think much of it. After all, it's not all that weird to take a walk even though it was quite late. He didn't think much of it. The watchman didn't see him come back, but he figured he missed him when he went on his bathroom break probably. But the guy didn't show up at work the next day. Someone from work went to check up and he wasn't there. Nothing was disturbed. He was just gone. Everyone thought he had dropped dead, killed by thugs or an accident or some medical condition. The workplace filed a police report. Here's when it gets weird. It turns out, the guy had created a fake identity. Any credentials he had given were fake. The references he had given had never heard of him. The family address he'd given didn't exist. The police didn't find anything illegal in the apartment, but they didn't find anything that would give a clue as to who he was either. We moved away a few years ago, but I don't think the case was ever solved. It's definitely the best unexplained mystery that I've personally come across. Edit. To answer some questions, I don't live in the US and there's no concept of witness protection here that I know of. My father was a pathologist at a women's hospital in a very small town and the guy worked as his technician. He definitely had some experience in the field before he joined. The job also wasn't a well-paid one as many employees would quit quite frequently. This reminds me of a strange occurrence that happened in college. No mystery, but still one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced. A good friend of mine starts seeing this guy, who by all appearances seemed 100% normal, good looking, friendly and clean cut. Over a period of a week or two, he socializes with us at parties. I see him on campus with a backpack a few times and we make small talk about class and whatnot. I even saw him in my apartment complex one day and he invites me over to his unit to smoke a bowl. There was no furniture but it didn't seem weird at the time. He even had a dog. He probably told me something like he wasn't finished moving yet. I don't remember. A few days later I hear the dog barking during the day because his apartment was right upstairs from mine. But I think nothing of it. Then I run into my friend. She tells me he disappeared but not before stealing her credit cards or I think maybe draining her checking account. I can't remember. It turns out his name and identity were 100% made up. He spent like an entire week at least, pretending to be a fake person, and had us all thoroughly convinced he was the person he claimed to be, and a fairly swell guy too. It's been so long I don't remember all the details of how she found out, but I believe it was the police officer handling her case that advised he was a con artist who was known to them, because he had been reported by others in the same area, using the same alias. The apartment he was living in, we come to find out, was an empty unit that he somehow gained access to, and the barking dog he had just left behind. As far as I know, nobody ever figured out who the hell that guy really was. Maybe it's buried in here somewhere already, but the Silent Twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons, Wikipedia webpage. To twins. They only spoke to one another in a language they created. They also tried to kill each other on occasion. They were committed, where they both eventually decided that in order to live a normal life, one of them would have to die. So they decided which one of them would die, and then she did. Of heart failure, inflammation of the heart to be exact. The other went on to live a perfectly normal life. It's not so much an unsolved mystery, as it is WTF was all of this? What? How did they know they decided one needed to die? Why would one agree to die? How did she die from just deciding it? Why did I have to read this? I am never getting this out of my head. My great aunt broke her arm one day and she decided enough was enough. She gathered the family around and announced that she wished to pass away. She died very peacefully in her sleep that very night. No suspicious circumstances. Apparently it happens. My grandmother passed away a few years ago and I said as soon as I found out that my grandfather would go within a month. Sure enough, about 3 weeks later after he'd finished taking care of all her logistics and everything, he told my cousin that he'd had a dream that my grandmother had appeared to him and said, "I miss you. Come to me," and he died the next night in his sleep. They had been married for over 65 years. I think he just didn't see the point in living without her. It is strikingly common for bereaved elderly people to have a dream of their departed loved ones beckoning to them, and I within a very short period, a day or two, following the dream. My mother was a hospice nurse, and this was something she said they were taught to look out for, that and an impending sense of doom. My mom, while awake, said her beloved Uncle Henry was there to get her. He kept telling her it wasn't time yet. The last day she spoke, she said he was there with the little lamb and he said it was time. It still gives me goosebumps to think about her staring over to where she thought he was standing. A week before my mother died, I was sitting with her on her hospice bed helping her eat breakfast. She was pretty out of it by then. Metastatic brain cancer combined me, but still aware of her surroundings enough to know I was there and who I was. Suddenly, she stopped looking at me and started staring fixedly at a blank patch of wall over my shoulder. She raised her hand and pointed, then started smiling at whatever she saw. Shortly after, she lost consciousness and began demonstrating other signs of slipping away, and passed away a week later without ever really waking up. She probably should have gone that night, except we all kept yelling at her to stick around because we were waiting for my brother to fly in. I fully believe she thought she was seeing her mother and sister over my shoulder, beckoning for her. She used to say she thought that when she died, it would be like walking down a jetway from an airplane, and they would be waiting at the end. Whether they were actually there, or if it was just her brain hallucinating things, doesn't really matter, because it clearly made her happy and that's all I care about. I truly believe in this type of thing. My grandfather was unhealthy but was trucking along for years. Then his lifelong friend passed away. He was in the hospital within a week. They said it is pneumonia. He was basically in a coma, but would sometimes come to enough to try to remove his mask in his sleep. My grandmother said something along the lines of he must not know what is on his face, but it was pretty clear he was trying to remove the one thing keeping him alive. He eventually died after a week in the hospital. He was an angry, grumpy farmer with a short temper, but when he wasn't yelling at you he really cared. After his friend died he just couldn't do it anymore. I read a detailed article on them a few months ago. It's actually a fascinating story, albeit super fucking weird. When the twins turned 14, a succession of therapists tried unsuccessfully to get them to communicate with others. They were sent to separate boarding schools in an attempt to break their isolation, but the pair became catatonic and entirely withdrawn when parted. This is just insane to me. The 1990 heist on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The 13 works stolen are still lost. Culprits were never found. Edit. Find more about the theft here. Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. Wikipedia webpage. Thanks to Yuha who shared an article on one suspect of the case. Gardner's suspect's sentence was cut. The Boston Globe webpage. Probably still bouncing around the underworld as a form of payment. If you have the chance to do so, definitely go to the Gardner to see the empty frames. Eerie, but also really cool. The Gardner Museum is fantastic. I live about a mile away and end up there often when I have a free day. The empty frames are definitely the most intriguing thing there. Edit. I'm definitely not saying the hundreds of pieces of art left in the museum aren't beautiful. They are much more beautiful than the empty frames. The frames just serve as a reminder of the largest art heist ever and have intrigue and mystery that the other art doesn't hold. Both the story of the heist and the remaining art make the Gardner Museum an incredible visit. I think you still get free admission if you go on your birthday, or if your name is Isabella, on any day. You do. I will say though, in general the museum has pretty reasonable rates to get in, which I appreciate. It's like $5 for students and $15 for everyone else. They also have tons of discounted admission nights and events. So many museums charge an absurd amount to get in the door. FBI is 90% sure some mobster in Connecticut did it, but they don't have enough proof to charge him. Huska Castle creeps me out. Basically this Bohemian fortress was constructed on top of an ancient Slavo-Germanic pagan ritual site which was a very deep hole. Nothing too weird about that except for the way the castle was built. For one, it's built in a useless position and served no strategic purpose, so it was not desirable for medieval lords of Bohemia or any invaders to control. Then people realized that the castle was actually inverted. The fortifications were on the inside, arrow slits, turrets, thick fortress walls slanting into the castle, etc. It's as if they were trying to keep something inside. There's a legend that a Bohemian king lowered a prisoner into the hole that the castle was built on and he began screaming, so they pulled him back up and he had aged 60 years and died. Then during WW2 the Nazis did actually occupy the castle for a time, but they reported some strange sounds, and when Allied forces stormed the castle the Nazis were dead or abandoned the place. For sure there's some folklore involved with the place, but the fact that the castle was built clearly to keep something inside opposed to out, and even the Nazis had issues with it. It definitely makes it seem like some ancient horror lies within that hole. TL. Dr. Huska Castle was built on top of an ancient pagan hole with fortifications inside not outside, as if to keep something in not out. Nazis tried occupying the castle but ended up dead or abandoned it. Oh man, this is one of my favorites. It's just so utterly weird. The castle was built with no fortifications, no water, no kitchen, near no trade routes, and with no occupants at its time of completion. That isn't a place you live in. It's for keeping something in. I know. I think this is one of those rare mysteries where the evidence that is there is very damning and genuinely has everyone confused and disturbed. If some stone walls are enough to keep it in for centuries, is it really worth worrying about? Everyone said I was daft to build a castle over a gateway to hell, but I built it all the same. Ended up dead or abandoning it. Is that dead and or abandoning it? Cause it'd be easy to tell if they died or abandoned it, cause the dead guys would be there. I am going there in a week. I'll do this damn drone thing that everyone keeps talking about. Edit. Okay, so work asked me to extend and being a team player, I am. So we'll be home in 12 more days, specifically on the 20th of February. After that, promise to go there and check it out, as I am really curious about it as well. Never heard about it and it's only an hour away. Can't believe I know nothing about it. Edit the 28th of February, get this. Can go. Castles are closed around Praha right now due to the cold weather. Pipes are frozen and the tours and getting around them have been suspended. I know most of you were hanging on me getting there, and I do not want to disappoint. But for sure when they open up again I will suss this out. Surprisingly my checkmates know of the castle, but haven't heard of any of the haunted stories. I also attended some rave party in the neighboring farms years ago and could see the castle on the hill, or so I was told. The Mary Celeste, Wikipedia webpage. TL. A merchant ship found abandoned and adrift in 1872. The crew's belongings had not been disturbed. There were ample provisions for the sale. The cargo was not disturbed. However, the lifeboat was gone. The crew just disappeared. According to the article, a lot of scholars think that it's likely the vessel was struck by a waterspout, which explained the water found on board and why the crew might have panicked and abandoned ship even though the waterspout ended up not causing significant damage to the vessel. Seems plausible that they might have overreacted to one and then eventually were lost because the lifeboats couldn't keep them afloat forever. I've also heard of minor explosion theory, something to do with alcoholic fumes leaking, being set alight. It wouldn't have been strong enough to burn much but would have made a fantastic explosion. Yeah, it was obviously something that spooked them bad that wouldn't have ended up harming them badly, but they didn't know it at the time, of course. Wrong kind of barrels for transporting alcohol, diffused through the wooden seals, causes quick flashes on the candles, so crew abandoned a boat expecting an explosion, end up in smaller tender being pulled along by the main ship. Eventually rope breaks and they are cast adrift. It'd be a million times creepier if the lifeboat wasn't gone. There's no mystery here. The crew thought they had to get off the ship and got lost at sea. Oh yeah, one of the best theories I heard was that the cargo of denatured alcohol started making noise or leaking or something, and the crew thought that it might explode. The theory then goes that they all got into a small boat and tied that boat to the Mary Celeste to wait it out and see what would happen. Then, the idea is that the rope that they used was old and worn out and it just snapped, leaving them floating adrift at sea. That would be a good explanation for why nothing was taken or amiss. They thought that they would be going right back. The Camden Wonder, Wikipedia webpage. In England, 1660, a 70-year-old man named William Harrison was walking a few miles to the next village when he disappeared. Later, they found his clothes covered in blood, including his hat which looked like it had been slashed open. Harrison's servant, John Perry, pleads guilty to the act and is executed along with his brother and their mother. 2 years later, William Harrison returns to his village alive, having found his way back to England on a ship from Portugal. The guy claims to have been sold into slavery in Turkey, but the story makes no sense because how would Turkish slavers get to England? And even then, why would they capture a frail old man to do slave labor? To this day, nobody has any idea why the servant confessed to murder they didn't commit, or what actually happened to Harrison. There are false confessions from people in 2018. I'm sure a servant giving a false confession in 1660 isn't out of the realm of possibility. It's actually the perfect time period for him to have been taken as a slave. The Islamic countries on the Barbary coast were taking large numbers of European slaves at that time, including from coastal English towns, and they may well have traded some of those slaves into Turkey. Source: Barbary slave trade. Wikipedia webpage. That said, I doubt the slavers ever made it as far inland as Chipping Camden, and we'd probably have heard more about it if they did. Not impossible that someone grabbed him as an easy target on their way out of the country, I guess, but hardly likely. The Lead Mask Mystery of Brazil. The bodies of two men found wearing lead masks covering their eyes with a notebook that mysteriously read 4:30 p.m. be at the determined place 6:30 p.m. swallow capsules. After effect. Protect metals. Wait for signal in Portuguese. Just to add a bit more conspiracy, I will post some observation made by you. Hang on to Rego in this thread. Lead masks case. Why it's even weirder than you thought. Unresolved Mysteries webpage. Do more reading and you'll only see the case gets weirder. These people were into some strange stuff. The Italian Wikipedia article details reports of the same two young men setting up extremely bright, powerful, explosive fireworks. The lead masks must have been to shield their eyes from the bright flashes from the fireworks they used. Several days after their death, a UFO sighting sounding vaguely similar to their fireworks was reported. The strangest but most obscure report, though, is that another lead mask death happened 4 years earlier. Flying Saucer Review magazine reported that a man named Hermes Louis Fitosa was found dead in 1962 around the same exact area with the same exact type of lead mask positioned on his face. According to Wikipedia, investigations had revealed that the victim had gone to that place with the specific intent to experiment alleged psychic abilities that would have allowed him to pick up radio and television signals without the use of electronic means, but only through the power of mind. If all this is true, this seemed to be some kind of occult thing. If it was a ritual suicide, it might have been done with the intention of continuing to live outside of their physical bodies. Accidental death can easily be ruled out if the Hermes Louis Fitosa case is true. It's disappointing that there isn't more information about these spiritualists. Many have suggested they were a part of a group of people attempting to contact aliens. I actually think this makes the case a lot less weird. This would really creep me out if these were two totally normal dudes and it was out of character and unexplainable why they were there or what they were doing. The fact that they were into this kind of thing and that at least one other person had tried some weird way of contacting aliens and dying makes this not a big mystery. It just seems like they were part of some small group or belief system that was into some pretty out there stuff. Two people who are a little off have a mutual interest in the case from 1962. They start talking to each other about it and what started as a mild interest turns slowly into a hobby and then eventually becomes a full-blown obsession. The men convince themselves this is real, or at least one of them does and the other follows along and they try to start following what they believe are important rituals. Doesn't seem too mysterious. But I'm just a dumb internet guy, so what do I know? The Devil's Footprints. Hoof-shaped footprints in the snow in South England that went for up to 100 miles. The footprints went over houses, haystacks, rivers and even rooftops instead of going around them. It appears on Thursday night last. There was a very heavy snowfall in the neighborhood of Exeter and the south of Devon. On the following morning, the inhabitants of the above towns were surprised at discovering the footmarks of some strange and mysterious animal endowed with the power of ubiquity, as the footprints were to be seen in all kinds of unaccountable places on the tops of houses and narrow walls, in gardens and courtyards, enclosed by high walls and palings, as well in open fields. Devil's Footprints, Wikipedia webpage. I read a short story based on this once, in a collection of horror-themed short stories. The story was set in like 2050, where AI controlling house functions like air conditioning, door locks, security cameras etc. was commonplace. Basically, the story just follows a teenage brother and sister having a costume party on Halloween, and someone points out that there are weird footprints leading up to the door, so the brother goes around looking for someone dressed like a goat or minotaur or horse or something. The brother describes the footprints to the house eye, who talks about that devil's footprints story in Exeter, Devon. The eye then says he can't see anyone in the house who is wearing anything resembling the footprints leading up to the house, but that he has oddly lost control of the locks and the air conditioning. Then the devil reveals himself to the partygoers and breathes a poison gas, saying everyone will die. The eye maintains that he cannot see or hear the devil, but everyone else can see and hear him and eventually die to the gas. Story culminates with multiple houses found with dead people inside from a poison gas, suspected to be caused by a nearby factory that was leaking the same gas. Except the devil's footprints led up to every single house affected, but no tracks led away from them. Fuck, I wish I could read that short story collection again. It had some awesome stories. I told this one before, but Rico Harris. He was a massive 6 feet 9 inches former Harlem Globetrotter basketball player who had drug issues earlier in his life, but had made a full recovery and was getting his life back on track. He was driving along California's Interstate I-5, from his home in Southern California to Seattle, to live with his girlfriend. He was somewhere just north of Sacramento, exhausted, and told his girlfriend over the phone that he wanted to check out the mountains. All calls stopped since then. His car was found a couple days later by a patrolman near a rest stop in the mountains. A massive search was launched. No signs of him. The strangest part, a driver later reported seeing a massive 6 feet 9 inches individual wandering down the highway, just a mile from where the car was found. A week later, a search was relaunched. Massive size 17 footprints were found in the ground that were not there before. They were getting very close, and then, nothing. No trace, no body, nothing. Where did Rico go the first time he disappeared? Where was he for an entire week? And where did he disappear to again? The fact that someone could disappear twice is what makes this so damn mystifying to me. Interesting. So the wiki article, Wikipedia webpage, has some details about dates and times. I don't understand why he's leaving at midnight for a 16-hour drive with an important interview the next day. Everywhere says that he called his girlfriend to say that he was going up into the mountains to rest. Like, what the hell does that even mean? I'm going up into the mountains? What is he, a goat? Gonna find a cozy little cave to nap in? Such a weird story. Makes it sound like he was already not in his right mind at that point, for whatever reason. So leaving his car to wander and get lost seems like less of a stretch. I did this to drive from La to Portland. I got up at 2 AM to make the 17-hour drive. Got home at 6 PM that evening. It make the drive feel shorter and you don't get tired as quick. A local suicide. She's known as the Annandale Jane Doe. Network webpage. December 1996. Under the cover of the night, she walked into a small cemetery and sat up against a mausoleum overlooking the section where children were buried. She put on headphones, sipped the last of her brandy, and then slipped a plastic bag over her head. Next to her was a small Christmas tree, a backpack, and a Minnie Mouse fanny pack. She left a note, saying she was deceased by her own hand, along with $2.50 bills for her cremation. Her ashes sit in the local police department, and to this day, no one here in the DC metro area knows who she was. So now that we have companies like 23andMe and whatnot, do they submit all these unidentified does' blood? Surely they will be able to close at least a few cases. Late to the party, but what the heck? I'll throw my hat into the ring. My favorite is the disappearance of Ray Gricker. Ray Frank Gricker was an American attorney who served as the district attorney of Center County, Pennsylvania, from 1985 until 2005. On the 15th of April, 2005, Gricker went missing under mysterious circumstances and has not been heard from since, after he had been missing for over 6 years with no trace of his whereabouts. Center County authorities declared Gricker legally dead on the 25th of July, 2011. That's the short version. The long version is he was the DA that oversaw Center County, and that includes Penn State University. There were rumors that at the time of his disappearance he was looking into the Second Mile. The Second Mile was a non-profit organization for underprivileged youth, providing help for at-risk children and support for their parents in Pennsylvania. It was founded in 1977 by Jerry Sandusky, a then Penn State assistant college football coach. The cops eventually found his car. The car contained his county-issued cell phone but not his laptop computer, nor his keys, nor his wallet, and investigators identified no signs of foul play. On the 30th of July, 2005, fishermen discovered the county-issued laptop computer of Ray Gricker in the Susquehanna River beneath a bridge between Lewisburg and Milton. A Pennsylvania State Police computer expert analyzed the computer and found that its hard drive was missing. 2 months later, someone recovered a hard drive on the banks of the Susquehanna River about 100 yards from the location of the laptop. However, it was badly damaged, and analysis by the FBI, U.S. Secret Service and the firm Crawl on Track all attempted but failed to recover any data from the hard drive. My theory: he was about to drop the hammer on the Second Mile, rumored to be a pedo ring, and Sandusky but got found out. They got him. They killed him and they destroyed the evidence. TLDR. We are. True Crime Garage did a great and thorough review of this one on their latest episode. Although they butchered the words Susquehanna and Bellefonte, I thought I knew all the details on the case but didn't know that some years before, Gricker had served as an advisor to an author who wrote a fictionalized book about the Betsy Artsma murder, in which a former cop, a non-smoker like Gricker, disappears on the 15th of April, just as Gricker did, leaving his car locked with cigarette ashes inside. A Pennsylvania State Police computer expert analyzed the computer and found that its hard drive was missing. I'm not sure how much expertise it takes to look at a laptop and say there's no hard drive in that. My usual answer is the Springfield 3 Wikipedia webpage. But another baffling case is the Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre Wikipedia webpage. The 10th of February, 1990, 2 men robbed a bowling alley in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They got away with about $5,000, but left some money that was visible to them behind. Surviving witnesses stated that the men seemed to be looking for something. 7 people were shot, 4 died, 3 of them being children. No arrests or even suspects. The Enigma of Caspar Hauser Wikipedia webpage. I find the story of Caspar Hauser, an anonymous teenager found wandering the streets of Nuremberg in the early 19th century, fascinating. He appeared out of nowhere with no family, friends or anyone who could confirm his identity. He claimed to have been kept in almost total isolation for his whole life up until that point. His linguistic skills were severely limited, consistent with someone who had grown up with very little human contact. Rumors began to circulate that he was actually a German prince who had been swapped at birth with a dead baby to prevent his succession to the throne by scheming relatives. Rather than kill him, they locked him up in complete isolation and left there to be forgotten, until somehow he was freed or managed to escape. He attracted several wealthy sponsors over the course of his short life, but none were successful at solving the mystery of his origins. He died under suspicious circumstances, stabbed by an unknown assailant, 5 years after being found. Of course he may have just been a deranged fantasist or attention seeker. Who knows? Edit. Fixed link. Prior to his death he was also attacked by another unknown assailant. I read about this when I was 10 and it always creeped me out. Read the whole Wikipedia. It seems like there's ample evidence that he had some learning disabilities, but was possibly lying about his backstory and the threats on his life in order to make himself appear more interesting. Evidence that he was lying. 1. He was more intelligent and capable than other people who have been in isolation. They cite several doctors and psychologists who say the conditions he claimed to live in were unlikely because he either would have died or would have been much less capable than he was. Edit. Came back to elaborate on this. When he was found he could say 2 phrases, horse and something along the lines of I want to be a cavalryman like my father. He was also able to write. He claimed he was recently taught to write by one of the people imprisoning him. No one supposedly spoke to him before then. The man taught him by silently guiding his hand on paper. He then rapidly learned to speak in the care of his first caretaker, who I believe was a teacher. He also claimed that the people imprisoning him drugged him frequently to dress and groom him. He was groomed and dressed when he walked into town. He was in his late teens when he was first discovered, and was healthy and in good shape. To every caretaker he ever had, and there were several, ended up deciding that he was a narcissist who frequently lied to them. The final caretaker, a lord, insisted that he had been lying about everything, and thus none of them wanted anything to do with him. So he was just shipped off to another wealthy sponsor. He was adopted by the city's government when he was first discovered. Based on assumptions about his story, it got good press at the time, so people were interested in him. 3. When he first wandered into town, he had a letter that explained his circumstances, supposedly written by his mother, or the person who imprisoned him. The letter claims he cannot talk but that he writes exactly like the letter's own handwriting. Ostensibly because the individual taught him to write, which later made people believe he had written the letter. The content of the letter says that they are releasing him to the government's care to either make him a cavalryman like his father, or execute him. 4. More letter stuff. When he was fatally stabbed, another letter was written and hidden in the woods, or something like that. This one was written backwards, mirror writing, and had several spelling and grammatical errors that were consistent with Casper's own abilities. It was also folded in a notable triangular shape that he folded his own letters in. 5. He was attacked twice, once minorly in his first or second, I forget, caretaker's house. His blood trail was then shown going to his own room and then to the cellar. He later recounted being hit by a hooded man. It was believed after the fact that he possibly cut himself with a razor, then hid it in his room before seeking help, due to the fact that he had just had an argument with his caretaker about how he frequently lied. His story was inconsistent, but they sent him to a new home for his safety. 6. His second attack occurred several years later. His most recent caretaker was getting fed up with him, having decided he was a swindler. Casper really wanted to go to London and an earlier caretaker had promised to take him there after his first stabbing. His new caretaker refused. It is thought Casper wrote his mirror letter, went into the woods and stabbed himself, then sought help. The letter was hidden or something and he was eager for people to find it. His story was highly inconsistent, and as he's dying, with a severe fever, he talks sometimes about writing with a pencil. The mirror letter was in pencil. It is believed he did this to try to drum up press about his story again and compel someone to take him to London. It is believed he stabbed himself more deeply than anticipated. He died 3 or 4 days after the fact due to, I assume, infection. 7. Later autopsies showed his brain was mildly impacted by what one doctor believed was a form of epilepsy. Psychologists have noted he may have had learning disabilities, histrionic disorder. He was noted by multiple individuals throughout his life for being very histrionic, and/or narcissism. Many of his caretakers complained about his overwhelming vanity. 8. His DNA was tested later on and nothing was found remarkable about it. I presume to do with royalty. Anyway, I think that's all the evidence. I really wanted this story to be a real royal mystery, but based on what the wiki has, there seems to be significant evidence he was a swindler and not much evidence that his story was, at the very least, what he claimed it to be. Edit. I forgot. There was also an incident where he accidentally shot himself in the head with a pistol. It was, apparently, a very minor injury. Grazed it or something. He admits to having done this to himself, but claims it was an accident as he was falling from a bookshelf, or something like that. Coral Castle, Ed Leedskalnin. There's a little 25 minutes documentary on YouTube that shows what this guy did. He was 5 feet 2, under 100 pounds and claimed he knew the secrets of the pyramids and Machu Picchu. This guy was lifting 20-ton blocks, and they say he had a sixth sense. Anytime someone tried to spy on him, he would know and stop working, and they'd only be able to see him just putzing around, not working. He died with his secrets. Coral Castle is still in Florida for people to visit. He made door out of an 11-ton boulder that was perfectly balanced on a pivot point that was so perfect a child could open it by pushing it with a finger. When they went to repair this door, it took 6 men and a 20-ton crane. I may have weight of crane wrong, to take it down, and they could not get the balance perfect again once they took it apart. Have you ever read some of his papers on magnetic current? Dude definitely saw things differently. No, I haven't, but I know he published a book on magnets. You have a link to the paper? That's fascinating. I just read the net about him creating an electrical current more effectively with copper and beef versus copper and a sweet potato. Definitely opens the mind. Always wanted to believe this was something cool and special, but then I saw some images of him with some kind of box on a tall tripod. Presumably some kind of pulley system. I hope he knew something cool that we don't, but that definitely put a damper on my excitement. I'd still love to see it one day. When they removed the boulder to repair it in 1986, they found that he had drilled a vertical hole through it and inserted a metal rod which was attached to the bearing of the truck. So it's not really a perfectly balanced 11-ton stone door in that sense. That's not to say there isn't still a lot mystery surrounding the Coral Castle and its construction. The Somerton Man. The body of an unidentified man was found on Somerton Beach, South Australia in 1948. In his pocket, the man had a piece of a paper with the words Taman Shud printed on it, a Persian phrase meaning ended. After a police appeal, the book Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was handed into police by a man who claimed it was put inside his car via an open window. This book had a piece of the final page torn, matching the paper from the Somerton Man. The back cover of the book had indentations from handwriting, believed to be a code. To this day the man has never been identified, nor has the code been deciphered. Best theory I've heard is that he was a spy who was killed by another agent. The paper he had contained indents like he'd written on another piece of paper that was resting on top, and they were able to get an unlisted phone number from the indents that belonged to a woman who apparently spoke Russian and was interested in communism, and never told her children how she knew Russian too. Fainted when she was brought in to view the corpse, and 3, had a son, who has since died, who had 2 unusual physical traits that the Somerton Man had. some sort of unusual outer ear shape and some sort of oddly shaped canine teeth, I think, and that unrelated. The odds of two unrelated people both having those traits are astronomically small. It's speculated that he was the father of the son, but after his death, one of the surviving sisters refuses to allow the body to be exhumed for DNA testing. So unless her other sister outlives her, we will never know for sure. Man. Can't believe I had to go this deep to find it. Thank you. The Somerton Man mystery is easily one of the most interesting mysteries I've ever encountered. The Astonishing Legends guys do a really solid deep dive on this. Astonishing Legends. Tamam Shud. The Somerton Man Mystery, Part 1. On Apple Podcasts webpage. Disappearance of Asher Degree. She was a shy 9-year-old girl who randomly left her house around 2 a.m. on Valentine's Day, 2000, in pouring rain. Her backpack was found later, but she never was. It's even stranger because some of the more common explanations for child disappearances don't apply here. For example, there was no computer in her house, so she couldn't have met some stranger who lured her out. She did well in school and she had a supportive family, so none of the typical reasons children run away. She was also extremely afraid of dogs, so it was out of character for her to go walking around alone. There were never any real clues to her disappearance, and the trail went cold basically the day it happened. Last time this thread was posted, the best explanation seems to be that someone in the family or at school managed to convince her to leave the house that night by telling her that her parents were having a surprise party for her birthday, parents' anniversary, and they wanted her to leave the house. She then left and was ultimately abducted some distance away. Really sad and obviously reliant on a lot of speculation, but it makes the most sense to me. Edit. SRY. I meant a surprise for her parents' anniversary. I know this is really dumb, but I read where it said, Harold and Aquila Degree married on Valentine's Day in 1988. Asher was born 2 years later and thought it meant literally 2 years later. She was also spotted walking next to the highway by multiple people, so someone would have had to give her an exact destination. On top of that, when someone tried to stop to see if she was okay, she bolted into the woods nearby. That was the last known sighting of her ever. Oh, that's depressing as fuck. Imagine going from surprise birth to level happy to you're kidnapped. She didn't have a computer in her house, but she did walk to and from school on her own, so it's possible she met someone there who was grooming her. It's not as if grooming didn't exist before the internet. While I was reading about Asher Degree, the Prime Minister of Australia, Wikipedia webpage, is also in the list of people who disappeared mysteriously. Yep. And we even named a swimming pool after him when he disappeared in the ocean. We Australians are big believers in irony. Abduction by a Chinese submarine is my favorite Harold Holt conspiracy theory. One I like, especially because it is victimless, is who on earth was behind the infamous Max Headroom broadcast hack. It was in the 80s and interrupted an episode of Doctor Who. There is a pretty great synopsis of it somewhere on Reddit, posted a year or two ago I think. For a more recent hack of this type, the emergency alert system was hacked just a few years ago with a message about an impending zombie attack. KRTV in Great Falls, MT was one of the station's affected YouTube webpage. A while back someone hacked a Czech weather show and made people think we'd been nuked. They owned up to it though. Geek webpage. The link they give for the footage doesn't seem to work. This one does though. YouTube webpage. This one creeps me out so much and I don't know why. It's pretty harmless on the surface. I think it's weird, not just because of the shit that was shown, but whoever it was, they had to knock out a powerful broadcast signal to transmit a 1:30-second video of a guy wailing while wearing a cartoon mask. One of the most mysterious murder cases in the history of Israel is the murder of 13-year-old Tyrada. In December 2006, 13-year-old Tyrada reportedly decided to skip the last period of that school day. She stayed outside in the schoolyard with friends for a while, before going back into the high school building to get a drink of water. She was last seen by several students going up a staircase leading to mid-floor of 10th grade classes. Later that afternoon, when she failed to return home, her mother contacted the police, and a search throughout the town began. Later that evening around 7 p.m., she was found murdered in a locked stall in the girls' bathroom, her throat slit twice and multiple additional cuts to her face, torso, and hands. According to news reports from the evening of the murder, the police's initial estimate was that teens from the school were involved. It was abandoned soon after. On the night of the murder, police detained a homeless person as a suspect. 3 days later, police detained the school gardener as well. Both were released 2 days later due to the fact they weren't at or near the school on that day and their alibis were confirmed. On the 11th of December, police detained and interrogated Roman Zadorov. On the 19th of December, 2 weeks after the murder, police announced in a press conference during primetime television, on the 8 p.m. evening news, that Zadorov is held as the most likely suspect and that he had admitted and reenacted the murder. A day later, his attorney informed that he had recanted his confession. The motive for the murder, as initially stated by the police, was insult hurled at Zadorov after he denied Tar's request for a cigarette. Both her family and friends, however, stated that not only did she not smoke, but she couldn't even stand the smell of cigarettes. They also stated that rude behavior and cursing were very uncharacteristic of her. That motive was dropped. Police later claimed that the motive was sexual abuse Zadorov suffered by female classmates when he was 8 years old in the Ukraine, which caused a rage fit after he suffered continuous pestering by the school's students during his work. But that could not be confirmed. No alternative motive for the murder was presented by police in the indictment. Zadorov was convicted in court and was sent to life in prison. In early 2016, a 4-part documentary TV series was aired in Israel, called Shadow of Truth, reviewing the Tyrada murder Roman Zadorov conviction affair. It caused a major media storm, raising many doubts regarding Zadorov's conviction and pointing at many flaws in his investigation and trial. The 4th episode revealed a never-heard-before testimony of man, referred to in the series as AH, who told the police in 2012 that his ex-girlfriend had confessed to him on the day of the murder, and even showed him a knife and clothes soaked in blood. Following his testimony, his ex-girlfriend, referred to as AK, was then arrested by police and investigated under suspicion of murder. While she was in house arrest, she left her home and tried to kill someone, and was subsequently sent to a psychiatric hospital without being further interrogated about her involvement in the Rada case, along with his own lawyer and Zadorov's public defender, who are also interviewed in the episode. AH claims that the investigation had been whitewashed. To this day Zadorov is still serving time for the murder and still pleading not guilty. Big part of the public in Israel believes he is innocent and there is a lot of pressure to reopen the case. If you want to get more details on this story, recently Netflix bought the documentary TV series and you can check it over there. Jesus Christ, that's brutal. How old was the crazy GF? Those are some extreme issues for a high schooler to do that. God, I hope I never get caught in the middle of a big crime. charged while innocent but having no proof because I was doing my normal day-to-day thing. The disappearance of Terrence Williams and Felipe Santos. Terrence Williams and Felipe Santos went missing in 2004 and 2003, respectively, under similar circumstances in Naples, Florida. Both men were last seen being arrested by former Collier County Sheriff's Deputy Corporal Steve Calkins for driving without a license. He claims he changed his mind about both arrests and last saw the men after he dropped them at Circle K convenience stores. Actor Tyler Perry offered a $100,000 reward for any information leading to the location of the men or leading to an arrest in the case. Al Sharpton, of the National Action Network, and Ben Jealous, President and CEO of the NAACP, also joined Perry in raising awareness of the cause. It's always unnerving when your hometown pops up on a list of unexplained mysteries. Lots of people accuse the cop of doing it, but since there's a lack of evidence, the case remains unsolved. Let me see if I can find some more information or conspiracy theories. Here's an audio transcript released in 2012 edited because spacing. Dispatcher, I hate to bother you on your day off, but this woman's been calling us all day. You towed a car from Vanderbilt and 111th Monday, a Cadillac. Do you remember it? Calkins, UHH, number. Dispatcher, do you remember? She said it was near the cemetery. Calkins, cemetery? Dispatcher, and the people at the cemetery are telling her you put somebody in the back of your vehicle and arrested them, and I don't show you arresting anybody. Calkins, I never arrested nobody. Former officer Calkins failed a polygraph test and was fired from the department after an internal investigation. So, say what you will, but I say, this fucker is guilty. Edit. For the sake of my inbox, I agree with everyone saying polygraphs are garbage. That is what I thought to be obvious, known. In Florida, however, polygraph tests may be admissible in court if both parties involved agree to it. I know it is bogus, but we're talking about Florida here. Super guilty. When cops arrest someone, they have to tell dispatch. That means he knowingly did not tell dispatch, which means he was planning on doing something that he didn't want dispatch to know about, something that couldn't be brought up as evidence against him. I bet they have no record of him calling in a check for either of these two individuals. He's so fucking guilty. There is no reason he shouldn't have called it in or written up the paperwork for an arrest. I mean, that's covering his own ass to show he's doing work, and if something like this happens, show that he did everything legit and has records to show it. That he denies the arrests or says he changed his mind just doesn't sound like good cop behavior given the missing women. PPL thinking anything other are just looking for mystery or whatever. I doubt anybody that's ever dealt with the police could tell you of an officer arresting someone and halfway to the jail letting them go lol. And he supposedly did this twice? My favorite is the David Lytton in Manchester, UK. It took a long time to identify the man. Even with photographs shared around, they found that the British man travelled to London from Pakistan and the same day walked into a pub in Manchester asking for directions to the top of the mountain. He was warned against it as it would be night time in the dead of winter by the time he gets there. He had nothing on him except train tickets and £130. His body was found the next day, lying down fully clothed with some medication in his pocket, which wasn't a dangerous medication from what I remember. It was rat poison, but, I think, in a different bottle of medication with writing in Urdu. When they did an autopsy, they found he had a false hip. They traced the serial number and it was apparently used at a hospital in Pakistan. which made very little sense because he appeared to be white and speak perfectly unaccented English. Also weird is that, if I remember correctly, he also had a return ticket for his train journey to London. Another part of the story was when he got to the train station up north. He was wandering about, according to witnesses, a bit weirdly, like he didn't know where to go. Some people have suggested that he was waiting on instructions on where to go. I personally think, and the general evidence does seem to support, that he was a bit of an odd loner who left London, moved to Asia for a few years and then came back and purposefully made himself very difficult to trace before committing suicide, and a bit of a power trip, like dying. But knowing that people are still going to have to spend a long time thinking about researching you. If you want a current UK mystery, then look up Corey McKeague. Edit. Pakistan is apparently not in the Middle East. Sorry, geography not a strong point of mine. Just my personal opinion. But I don't think Corey McKeague is a mystery. He climbed into the bin in a drunken stupor. Bin was hauled off and compacted, dumped at the landfill. Bin wasn't originally checked due to the error in the recorded weight, and the area where its load was dumped wasn't checked until months after his disappearance. As difficult as it must be, I think his mum is clinging on to false hope. The weirdest bit of the Corey McKeague case is that they found a human skull in the landfill site where he is thought to have ended up, only to date it and find it was from before 1945. They tracked down the person who had thrown it away but found no suspicious circumstances. What the fuck? Yeah, Corey McKeague isn't really a mystery anymore. He had to be in that bin all along and they just never checked because of the weight. But once they discovered that the weight was incorrect, then it became kind of obvious that that's what happened. American Dyatlov Pass. The American Dyatlov Pass. 5 young men abandon a warm, safe car and disappear into the night. Unresolved Mysteries webpage. 5 guys take a bizarre detour home from a basketball game. End up inside a near a cabin in the woods. End up starving to death and dying of exposure despite ample supplies in the cabin. A lot of people point to the fact that these people were slow adults as an excuse for the behavior, but nothing explains all of the weird events that seem to have occurred. The guy slowly starving to death over several weeks, months, when there was loads of food right there in the cabin. Apparently too scared to either eat it or leave. Got me. My personal theory. So one of the men, Gary Mathias, wasn't actually slow but had schizophrenia. He is also the one they never found. I'm not saying he did anything with nefarious purposes, but I feel like at one point they got lost, and since Mathias didn't have his medication, his symptoms started up, possibly exacerbated by the stress of it all. There was another man who had a heart attack and was sleeping in his car nearby. I think the men saw the car, got scared, and Mathias possibly freaked out and convinced them to run. I haven't found mention of what type of schizophrenia Mathias had, so my theory is assuming paranoid type. So anyway, they run off, get even more lost. Eventually they find the trailer, exhausted and hungry, maybe delirious from it and the cold weather. The men that were found outside I think were keeping watch. They possibly took shifts doing this. They were missing for weeks, after all. And I think Mathias is the one who covered the man in the trailer, Ted, with the sheets when he died. He then took Ted's shoes, because they were better suited for the weather, and left because he was the only one alive at this point and he had to keep running from whatever it is he believed was a danger to them. Basically my theory boils down to a shared delusion that went way too far and ended in their unfortunate deaths. I could be totally wrong. Either way, such a sad case. Edit. The uneaten food and unused propane tank could also be explained. 1. Some of the food was eaten, but they never found the rest of it, which was in a locker in the shed. They just simply didn't think to look for it. They took what was right in front of them and figured, well, that's all of it, I guess. 2. It's also possible none of them knew how to turn the heat on. The propane tank was in the shed, not hooked up to the house, so they would have had to hook it up. I don't even know how to do that, to be perfectly honest. There were matches in the trailer and plenty of books etc to start a fire, but they didn't want to start a fire in the house because, well, that's not a good idea at all. They might have been slow, but I think they knew that if they made a fire in the house they could set their entire shelter ablaze and they would be screwed. They didn't want to start a fire outside because it was colder outside than it was inside and the trailer felt much more safe. So to me, the uneaten food and lack of a heat source isn't really that mysterious. This one has a plausible explanation. The driver had a friend who lived nearby, whom they wanted to visit after the game. They missed a turn somewhere along the way, and the road they stayed on took them into the mountains. This was a group of young kids with special needs, so when they figured out they were lost, panic set in and they had to chase after one of the kids who couldn't keep it together. The detail that most fascinated me: there was another driver who was stranded just a few feet from where they were. He saw them. They probably saw him. They might have panicked, because seriously, who else would be up in the woods that time of the night? They could have been saved in that moment. The dancing plague of 1518 was a case of dancing mania that occurred in Strasbourg in July 1518. Around 400 people took to dancing for days without rest and, over the period of about 1 month, some of those affected collapsed or even died of heart attack, stroke, or exhaustion. Historical documents, including physician notes, cathedral sermons, local and regional chronicles, and even notes issued by the Strasbourg City Council are clear that the victims danced. It is not known why these people danced, some even to their deaths. Was it real dancing in the literal sense though? Could be that they couldn't describe the erratic swaying movements in any other way. I thought that too, but multiple institutions of experts during the time all use the phrase dancing, so it seems like they really meant dancing. This one's a brainbender for sure. Could they not determine, at least, what dance move they were performing? Well, given that some died of heart attack, stroke, or exhaustion, we can probably rule out the Safety Dance YouTube webpage. It seems a bit of a stretch for every source to describe it as dancing and yet not give a description of the symptoms unless it was actual, literal dancing. It's not the only time it's happened, either. Throughout, those affected by dancing mania suffered from a variety of ailments, including chest pains, convulsions, hallucinations, hyperventilation, 136 epileptic fits, 126 and visions, 1171. Sounds like they just accidentally discovered a fucked up hallucinogen. The disappearance of Maura Murray, Wikipedia webpage, disappeared after crashing her car into a snowbank in the middle of the night in the Kancamagus region of NH. Some witnesses saw the crash and even spoke to her, but by the time the police arrived minutes later, she was gone. Her personal effects strewn around the car and a rag stuffed in the tailpipe. K9s were used to track her scent, but it ended a few yards away from where she crashed. It's presumed that's where she was picked up or abducted by someone. Later that year, a man approached her parents and claimed his brother had kidnapped and killed her, but it was never proven. The Hinterkaifeck murders. German farmer found footprints leading from the woods to his farm, but no footprints going back. Days later he was murdered along with his whole family. When they investigated the case in 2007, they came to the conclusion that the case will officially be unsolvable due to age of the crime, lack of or mistreated evidence, etc. However, they have a strong belief theory on who did it, but out of respect to the living family, they will not name him. Defrosting Cold Cases webpage. In 2007, students from the First and Feldbruck Police Academy got the task to investigate the case once more using modern criminal investigative techniques. They concluded that it is impossible to solve this crime after all the time that had passed. Evidence is missing or was never taken from the farm. Crime scene sketches were not made and fingerprint traces were not taken or were not properly preserved. Possible suspects have passed away. They did consider one person to be the main suspect but do not name that person in their report out of respect for still living relatives. Again, there is suspicion but no hard evidence. The report can be found here. Der Mythos hinter Kafek webpage. Number 1. It's never explicitly stated, but basically people think they're talking about Lawrence Schlittenbauer, the neighbor, who was suspected to have fathered Joseph. I think he was the one who immediately went to where the bodies were at when the neighbors, if I remember right, went to check out the farm. It implied he knew exactly where their bodies were at. Someone else said they thought they had saw him use a key to open a door, the key that was missing, not to mention the rumors about him and Victoria and Joseph, etc. TLDR. This case is unofficially solved. It was probably the neighbor. I like how it's unofficially solved while at the same time being officially unsolvable. Haha, I like how it says but will remain unnamed out of respect for the family, and then you're just like, yeah, it's totally this Lawrence dude. I think there is some good speculation about what happened. Either the neighbor, I remember there was an affair between him and one of the rancher's daughters, or some weirdo drifter saw the farm, started to hide in there and eventually killed them all. Wasn't another suspect a son of the family who went mad in World War I? And there was some supposed freaky incest shit going on or something. Could be bullshit though. I barely remember tbh. One I feel a connection to because I followed it from the beginning. 4 years ago a young girl called Anka Silpinal went missing. Was at a music festival in Croatia with a few friends. One morning she got out of the van to go for a pee. She never came back. She was reported missing shortly after. The area was searched and they found her wallet and phone in an abandoned ruin not far away. No trace of her anywhere though. Just a few days ago some bones were found not far from where she disappeared from. DNA tests show it's her. She apparently died from a blow to the head but no one knows anymore, and the family are trying to get her remains back so they can ask for a real autopsy. The Croatian police were not helpful at all and the French police didn't give a shit either. So no one knows what happened to her. Here's one I learned about recently. In 2000, a mummy was found around Pakistan with an inscription on the sarcophagus claiming her to be the unknown daughter of the Persian king Xerxes. Rodagoon. It caused a big hubbub, since it was the first apparent Persian mummy. It was fascinating because it had been mummified in traditional Egyptian fashion, complete with all the organs extracted including the brain. And I even recall something about golden resin being found inside the body, but deeper examinations revealed a lot of smaller details that didn't add up. One archaeologist remembered being contacted by a middleman about a mummy that resembled the photos, and when he'd had a piece of the sarcophagus carbon dated he found it was only 250 years old. The inscription also used a Greek form of the name instead of Persian. The bandages dated to the wrong period, and the stone pad was found to be 5 years old. and a lot of other experts noticed that the heart had been removed, which Egyptians absolutely did not do. They quickly decided she wasn't a Persian princess, but here's the freaky part. Further examination on the mummy revealed her to be a woman between 21-25 who died around 1996 from some sort of blunt impact, like being hit by a car. There have been a trail of suspects from it, since it was found in possession of some Pakistani and Irani dealers who were trying to sell it on the black market. But no one knows the victim's identity, and we probably never will. Here's the Wikipedia article on it with a bit more history. Wikipedia web page. Edit. This is officially my most popular post ever. To answer some common questions. We don't know for sure if she was murdered or just a random Jane Doe. I personally lean towards murder given the advanced preparation put into the situation. But others have pointed out the gang responsible could have made arrangements to collect a suitable body from a morgue. Two similar Persian mummies have reportedly turned up since then. Likely produced by the same gang. I'm not sure if the exact mummification process has been forgotten, but they can at least identify key traits in mummies and identify them as authentic through CT scans and carbon dating on the bones. I misread the part about the pad she was on. There was a reed mat that was found to be no older than 50 years old. The sarcophagus wasn't stone, but wood. As for all the questions about how they dated the stuff, to quote this article from Trafficking Culture webpage, although the sarcophagus was carved with royal symbols, closer examination revealed lead pencil marks that had been made to guide the carving. A CT scan of the body showed that the internal organs, including the heart, lungs and brain, had been removed prior to embalming, which was counter to Egyptian practice. There were grammatical errors on the breastplate's inscription, and, crucially, the inscriber had used the later Greek version of the princess's name Rhodagoon, instead of the Persian Wardagorna. Finally, radiocarbon dates of the reed mat showed it to be only 50 years old at most. Also, from the same article, here's some interesting details on what would be required to make the mummy based on a TV documentary aired by BBC. A person with knowledge of anatomy and embalming techniques, a cabinet maker, a stone carver, a goldsmith, and someone with a rudimentary knowledge of cuneiform. There would need to have been a facility to conduct mummification, which in itself would have taken half a ton of drying chemicals. The act of mummification must have taken place within 24 hours of the woman's death. So to summarize, yes, it's obviously known that it's a forgery. The mystery lies in this. 1. Who is the victim? 2. Who made the mummy? And 3. Was the victim killed specifically for the mummy, or a convenient corpse from a random accident? I'm personally leaning towards murder for the third one based on the above details. That is fascinating and a rare example of a story on a thread like this that I haven't heard. Same here. Only reason I dive into threads like these and usually leave with an empty stomach. There are hundreds of medieval artworks, paintings, drawings and books that depict men, sometimes knights, fighting snails. Sometimes the snails are snail size. Sometimes they are huge. Nobody has the faintest idea why or what these pictures mean. That's not entirely true. It is generally believed that snails were a symbol for the Lombards, who were seen as greedy and offensive. Orange Air. I was visiting friends in Vancouver, Canada in the autumn of 1999. At around 9 p.m. we stepped outside and soon tried to figure out what big bright sign or light was illuminating everything orange. To our amazement there was no lights of any kind. Then a neighbor came out and asked where the light was coming from. The haze, the fog, the air itself was absolutely glowing a greenish orange. Soon, others appeared, Dog walkers coming back bewildered. We decided to take a walk and sure enough it was everywhere. We saw another neighbor waving their arms in the air as if it was smoke, but it was just as if the atmosphere, the air itself, was simply electrified orange. About an hour later it wasn't too noticeable anymore, but for what it's worth, the sky, as in looking up to the clouds, was the most astonishing and strange electric blue I have ever seen in my life. Anyways, yes. There were enough reports to local planetarium that it was mentioned on local radio stations. The experts on hand suggested the only known way this could happen is if some sort of meteor or meteor shower had zoomed through the sky and some sort of glow phenomenon can happen. However, they emphasized that they had detected no such meteors at all. Nobody else heard or saw anything about meteors from locals either. To this day I have never heard any kind of explanation. I've never even heard or seen a similar experience. I don't know that I've ever found even a good hypothesis online in going on 20 years of internet accumulation. The whole neighborhood was glowing orange. The air itself was a bright glowing hue, as if a massive orange stagger light was being shined from somewhere we couldn't see. Well, for me, that's still the best unsolved mystery. I vote for the Zodiac Killer. He left multiple cryptic messages, some of which never got decoded, but they never identified him. There's much debate as to what happened to him, and even how extensive the scope of his killings. I believe the FBI still has a reward on information leading to his arrest, but nobody has heard anything in decades. I've always agreed with the idea that he was just a wacko who wanted to be remembered, and that a lot of his cryptic stuff was actually just random bullshit to keep the investigation from ever ending. Some of the notes might have been bullshit, but several did get cracked correct. MH motherfreakin' 370. What the hell happened to that plane and all those people? I saw an article suggesting there could have been a fire under the cockpit that overcame the pilots and disabling a number of life safety systems, causing the plane to climb to an altitude not suitable for breathing while never dropping the oxygen masks. This would have killed everyone on board while keeping the plane aloft until it ran out of fuel and crashed in the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. Edit. Source. Redirect notice web page of the article I was referring to. This could also explain why it's nowhere near where it's supposed to be. Just an empty plane full of dead people flying in the sky until it crashed in the sea. Exactly. If that was the case, I take solace knowing that they essentially all fell asleep and never woke back up. That does calm me down. But the thought of a plane full of dead people still flying is fucking haunting. It wouldn't be the first time. Back in 2005, on the 14th of August, Helios Airways Flight 522, Wikipedia web page, took off from Cyprus on its way to Athens. During the initial climb, the central computer warned the pilots that the plane was not pressurizing. But this was misinterpreted by the pilots and they thought they could solve the problem with help from maintenance. By 18,000 feet, the passenger oxygen masks deployed, obviously frightening the already oxygen-starved passengers. Those masks only generate enough oxygen to give the pilots time to descend to a safe, breathable altitude, approximately 12-18 minutes. The plane continued climbing to 34,000 feet, on autopilot, for over 3 hours, being put into an automatic holding pattern above Athens. The Greek Air Forces sent 2 fighters in case that something sinister was abound. But that wasn't the case. Eventually, the plane ran out of fuel and crashed on an empty hill. It is worth noting that not everyone was incapacitated, or by the time of the crash, in an unrecoverable coma brain dead, but a single flight attendant with deep sea diving training was still semi-conscious when the tanks went empty. He tried to make a possible crash landing, but hypoxia had probably greatly diminished his flying abilities. Would also explain why apparently the plane continued to ping to a satellite 4 hours after it disappeared. Wouldn't have to climb. Cruising altitude is already higher than Everest. Slowly cause some malfunction with the pressurization system would cause you to pass out, potentially without ever knowing anything is wrong. Even if the masks drop, they do not last for very long. They are intended to keep you alive while the aircraft descends. You can experience hypoxia in any altitude chamber, and it is very comfortable and at ease. If I had to choose a way to go, hypoxia would be a good option. The aircraft was making precise maneuvers. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, Wikipedia web page, media file, MH370 initial search Southeast Asia SVG. Well, after communications were lost, so it doesn't seem like the pilot was incapacitated. I can't believe I had to come this far down to find this comment. 4th anniversary is in about 6 weeks. 239 people died, and we don't know exactly how or why. The ocean is a damn big place, even a couple degrees off their intended course, and it would take decades to find trace of them. The 1962 Alcatraz escape. I really hope they managed to escape even though they were criminals, because I don't think they ever injured anybody. I am very interested in crime that requires smart thinking and where nobody gets injured by the criminals. I think it was deemed likely that they got swept out to sea, but the Mythbusters did prove that it was possible for them to have made it to shore. When they investigated at the time, they found no reports of stolen vehicles or burglaries at any nearby stores or anything. If they succeeded in making it to land, they got there in wet clothes with no money and somehow managed to disappear. This seems very unlikely unless they had help from the outside. I don't know that they ever tracked down any sort of possible outside accomplices though. Open unlocked cars, steal change and buy a bus ticket. I worked at a group home and that's what they did. Sometimes when they ran, or just begged for alms like a homeless person, and then buy a bus ticket. There was a massive manhunt all along the coast. They didn't have the provisions to get inland probably more than a few miles. There was no way these guys landed in San Francisco and panhandled discreetly. Guys smart enough to escape from Alcatraz and dumb enough to rob a store immediately after escaping, in the same area. I saw a PBS documentary on it that came to a similar conclusion. They were looking at ocean currents and determined, if they'd left before a certain time, don't remember the exact time, they stood a chance of getting to shore, but if they'd left after that time there was no chance. News report the other day, supposedly a letter was received from one of the escapees and they made it. Alcatraz escape, fugitive John Anglin's name on letter to police. BBC News web page. My name is John Anglin, reads the letter. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. I saw this the other day, but there has to be some proof that it's actually one of them before I believe it. The show Unsolved Mysteries did a really cool episode on how it was possible for them to escape. Also, an inmate said he got them help on the outside. The Atlas Vampire. The Atlas Vampire was an unknown assailant who committed the unsolved vampire murder, also known as the vampire murder case, in Stockholm, Sweden in 1932. Atlas Vampire. Wikipedia web page. The Atlas Vampire was an unknown assailant who committed the unsolved vampire murder, also known as the vampire murder case, in Stockholm, Sweden in 1932. On the 4th of May, 1932, a 32-year-old sex worker, Lily Lindström, was found murdered in her small apartment in the Atlas area of Stockholm near Sankt Eriksplan. She had been dead for 2-3 days before police broke into her apartment. She had suffered blunt force trauma to her head. Lily was found completely naked and face down on her bed. According to reports, sexual activity had taken place, with a condom found to still be protruding from her anus. The detectives noted that a gravy ladle was found at the scene, and on further inspection of the body, they realized her body had been drained of all of her blood. Police suspected the implement was used by the perpetrator to drink Lily's blood. Various clients fell under suspicion, but after a lengthy investigation, none were charged with her murder. The murder remains unsolved. There were rumors that head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, was a cross-dresser. One day the actress Vivian Vance came to visit the FBI. Years later the visitor logs were checked. Vivian Vance was not in them. A lot of good ones here. I have a relatively new unexplained mystery. The death of Missy Beavers in April 2016. She is a church gym instructor who was killed in the very early hour in the morning. She was doing fitness prep work when a guy with full police uniform murdered her with a hammer. Creepy footage of the suspect walking around. YouTube webpage. She had a lot of creepers on social media and had falling out with her husband's side of the family. The suspect pool is incredibly large and there are tons theories such as the guy in police uniform is a woman and her father-in-law carried out the murder. This dude does a great job of explaining the case in more detail. YouTube webpage. I'm still intrigued by the recent one of the two girls who actually got some recording of their abduction, but last I heard it was still a mystery. Liberty German and Abigail Williams. I heard that they found this guy who had a resemblance to the suspect and had been threatening hikers in a nearby state, but I don't think they have him as the killer of the girls. The disappearance of Brandon Lawson. He left his home after an argument with his wife and was heading to his dad's home. He ran out of gas along a highway in TX. He called his brother to bring him gas, and when his brother showed up all he found was Brandon's truck parked haphazardly. Shortly before he disappeared he also called 911 saying he was in a field and had ran into someone. They have yet to find any trace of him. There's a lot of serial killers in TX. In the bigger cities lots of homeless people go missing. Search documentary Boys for Sale. It's from the 80s, but points to some serious issues in that area, and I think they specifically mention Houston. A lot of runaways and homeless kids end up in the area, and the people on the panel talk about specific instances where young homeless boys working in the sex trade would go missing or end up dead in a dumpster somewhere. I'll edit in a link when I find it actually. YouTube webpage. Yeah, thanks for the link cause I don't think I want to Google Boys for Sale. Just search Boys for Sale butchulets for a school project so the FBI will back off. If I remember the call correctly, you can hear it on YouTube. You can hear other people shouting in the background, like he's being chased by people. Theories are he stumbled onto something he shouldn't see, like disposal of a body or random serial killer. What a shit day. Marital troubles. Running out of gas. Murdered because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I found the 911 call, Yauta webpage, and a comment on the video points out a pretty clear transcription of the conversation with the 911 operator that also includes the unknown voices in the background. Unknown guy at 044, YouTube webpage. They got the first guy, Brandon at 044, YouTube webpage. Same time as unknown guy. They got the first guy, Gunshot is heard at 0:45. YouTube webpage. Operator at 0:46. YouTube webpage. Do you need an ambulance? Brandon at 0:46. YouTube webpage. Same time as operator. That gunshot. Unknown guy at 0:48. YouTube webpage. Yeah. Brandon at 0:49. YouTube webpage. No. I need the cops. Brandon at 1:03. YouTube webpage. Help me. It took me a few listens to hear it all. But it's definitely there. Edit. Formatting and links. Shortly before he disappeared, he also called 911 saying he was in a field and had ran into someone. They have yet to find any trace of him. Not to mention he vanished while on the phone to the police and had a warrant out for his arrest. To call, he must have been pretty spooked. Video. YouTube web page of call. People do this in Russia all the time. They find roads where not a lot of people drive and in the middle of the night sit there and wait for a car to pass by and throw a fake body on the car to get the driver to pull over. Once they pull over, they either rob them or sometimes even kill them. Also, a really disturbing one that might be solved now. Who killed Katarzyna Zawada? Warning. This is not for the faint of heart. I am dead serious. Do not read this before eating. She was a Polish college student, and thus most of the information is in Polish. There's not much information on her available in English, which is honestly a surprise given the details of the case. She went missing in November 1998. Then on the 7th of January, 1999, something got caught in a tugboat's propeller, so the operator stopped it to try to untangle it. He found something he described as pale and nondescript, with a real foul smell, and he couldn't tell what it was. Then he noticed an ear. He didn't find her body, he found her skin. It had been neatly cut off from her body around the thighs and neck, missing her arms and face though still including her left ear. Investigators determined it had been in the river for 2 or 3 weeks by that point, and that it had been prepared to be worn like a suit. The rest of her body was never found aside from a leg found floating near a dam. One of the most horrifying and disturbing cases I've ever heard. Here's a post about it in the Unresolved Mysteries sub. Who killed and skinned Katarzyna Zawada in 1998 in Krakow, Poland? Unresolved Mysteries webpage. It also mentions a similar case that turned out to be unrelated, but just as disturbing. Here's a follow-up post about a suspect being arrested. Katarzyna's skin was found in a river in 1999. Suspect was arrested 2 days ago. Unresolved Mysteries webpage. There haven't been any major updates I know of since then though. And based on the comments, most of the evidence sounds pretty circumstantial, so he may not be the guy. Edit. This is officially one of my most popular posts ever. For the record, based on some additional information from the Polish Wikipedia page, it's pretty likely that the man arrested was in fact the culprit. So it's safe to consider this one solved explained. Holy fucking shit. I can't believe this isn't the top answer. What the fuck? I'm glad I scrolled down. Or maybe I'm not. I only heard about this recently when a friend showed me a video of partially solved mysteries. I am sincerely surprised there's not more information available in English given how gruesome it is. I'm Polish, also currently in Krakow where this all happened. And Polish Wikipedia says that in October 2017 they arrested 52-year-old guy that was known for his passion for torturing animals, bodybuilding and martial arts. He knew the victim, had underwent his military service in a religious hospital. He assisted in the dissecting room. He worked at the Zoology Institute where he dealt with skinning of animals. He was fired from there though after he murdered all experimental rabbits. In his psychological profile, the experts pointed sadism and tendency to harass women. After the murder he became religious fanatic. It was established that he visited the grave of the murdered girl. He also described the murder in his diary. On the 31st of May, 1998, around 1 p.m., the Krakow police received a phone call. An elderly man said there was a murder at his house in a tiny village near the city and he believed his grandson was the murderer. In the house's basement, a corpse was hanging upside down from the ceiling. The victim, a 50-year-old man, had been beheaded and the skin of his head and face was found at the scene. It was sewn to form a mask. The head was found outside the house. The murderer was a Russian immigrant, Vladimir W. The victim, his father Wittelich. Interrogation revealed even more shocking details. Vladimir wore his father's face and clothes for a whole day and pretended to be him in front of his grandfather, who didn't see very well. The motive, he said, was the hatred he felt towards his father after he cheated on his wife and left her with nothing in Nalchik, Russia to pursue a new life in Poland with his son and father. It is possible that Vladimir knew Kasia. They both studied psychology on the Universitet Jagiellonski, albeit they weren't in the same class. He started in 1992, she did in 1993, but dropped out after a year. He did not confess to killing. He is currently spending his 25-year sentence in a Russian jail, so he will be out in a few years, maybe 3-4. Sounds great. Judging from the follow-up, this guy wasn't the guy to actually do it. They think it was some 50-year-old guy who confessed it in church to his priest during confession. Are priests required to tell police this stuff, or would it be protected like an attorney-client relationship? I can't remember the name and it's driving me crazy, but there was a guy in 1800s France who literally kept eating, was thin and literally entire feasts that were meant for several people, and he would feel like shit if he didn't eat that much. His parents actually disowned him because they couldn't afford to feed him. Edit. His name was Terror. Here's his Wikipedia page. Enjoy. Edit 2. But for real this time. Wikipedia web page. If I remember correctly, he smelled like death literally, and when he died, they found that some of his internal organs were in state of decomposition and full of pus. The doctors refused to inspect anything anymore cause he literally smelled so bad. I have personal mystery that has plagued my roommate and I for several months. One morning, my roommate woke up and went to the bathroom. She found small dirt paw prints in the bathtub, on the toilet seat, and in the sink. They looked like they belonged to a kitten. We were perplexed. We have no cat. We left no windows or doors open or unlocked the night before, and nothing was damaged in the morning. We're on the second story, and there are no holes in our walls, floors, or ceilings. We have no fireplace or dog door. We spent a good hour before work that morning searching for a cat hiding out in our apartment. To no avail. This was about 5 months ago and it hasn't happened again since. But this is a mystery that'll bother me until I'm old and grey. Another fun dimension to the story is that we frequently joke about having spirits in the apt. Neither of us are superstitious at all, but living in an old crappy apartment is more fun if you blame stupid shit on something supernatural. If a cabinet door pops open, we'll say those dang spirits and slam it shut. Now we've concluded that the spirits have a kitten. Edit. Pictures of the prints in question. Imgur webpage. Fairly certain those ain't rat prints. Raccoon more likely, but still have no idea how it got in or out. Middle of winter and we found a duck in our basement with literally no way for it to get down there besides opening locked doors. On Long Island, New York, we have the Gilgo Beach killer who has killed somewhere between 10 and 20 prostitutes over the past 20 years. They've chopped their bodies up into tiny pieces and dumped them in the dunes at the beach. They've identified some of the remains, but many of the others remain unknown. They also haven't found all the components of some of the bodies, so some of the genders are just listed as human head and left foot. The FBI was involved, but it's very much remained a cold case with no leads. At one point it was suspected that the local police chief was the killer, but those accusations largely remained unfounded. The Croydon cat killer. M25 cat killer. Wikipedia webpage. It started in Croydon, England in 2014, with cats being mutilated and dismembered and left in plastic bags on their owner's doorstep. It's still going on today, having spread out around the M25 area and now even further north and south. Over 400 cats and other small animals slaughtered. One person still out there. When we were kids, neighborhood cats started disappearing. Then my little brother's girlfriend's favorite cat went missing. Well, they spent days searching around the neighborhood and walking by this one sketchy old guy's house. His girlfriend says she has a feeling the kitty is in there. My bro broke into the garage and sure enough, kitty is in a fucking cage in the garage. Freed the kitty and vandalized his garage rather than call the cops and admit to breaking in. I vote for DB Cooper, the guy who hijacked a plane, collected a ransom, parachuted out the back, and completely disappeared. Wasn't that the theme for the Without a Paddle movie? They were searching for DB Cooper's lost treasure? I was very invested in the DB Cooper mystery until I realized he jumped out of the plane during a storm at night with the trick parachute into the area that empty St. Helens would cover with ash only a few years later. So, it kind of makes sense that we didn't find his body or the money. It wasn't a trick parachute. It was a training parachute. It was also just the belly-mounted reserve. He still had a perfectly functional main parachute. The storm definitely makes a jump like that dangerous but not impossible. One day the Coen brothers need to make a movie based on the story of DB Cooper. I worked with one of the FBI agents on that case a few years ago. He does security now, and he said he was fairly certain he fell in that river and died. The evidence seemed to point to that, but they couldn't confirm since the body was not recovered. Interesting. A young boy once found some of Cooper's stolen bills moldering away in a riverbank. So it's a possibility they're the only bills that ever turned up. I know it's been 6 hours, so it's unlikely anyone will see this, but I'd like to know what the fuck actually happened in Hamelin in 1284 that made a bunch of children vanish. Like, that's where the tale of the Pied Piper comes from. We know that something did actually happen because the history of Hamelin starts in 1384 with it's been 100 years since our children were taken. What took them? Why? Why do we still use the expression "it's time to pay the piper"? We don't know. Maybe it actually was a fucking fairy with a flute. We have no proof that it wasn't. Edit. It actually starts with "it is 100 years since our children left," according to Wikipedia. Most likely explanation seems to be that children of the town refers to people born in the town, not actual children, and they were recruited to help settle new German lands in the east. It was pretty well documented that locators, who were apparently often dressed in bright unusual clothes, much like the Pied Piper, were operating in that area at that time, trying to find able-bodied people to move to areas of modern-day Poland. You also have people and settlements with names common in Hamelin's region appearing in these new German lands at around the same time. Devil's Kettle. Somebody literally pushed a car into it. The mystery of Devil's Kettle Falls MNN. Mother Nature Network webpage. Damn, that's interesting. Over the years, researchers and the curious have poured dye, ping pong balls, even logs into the kettle, then watched the lake for any sign of them. So far, none has ever been found. I am gonna trust that there's some kind of big flaw in my thinking, but why has no one ever tried to chuck a GPS tracking device in there? I mean, I bet things like that have been tried before, but the article didn't mention it. GPS tracking devices have to connect to some kind of communication network, satellites or cell phone towers, neither of which get a connection underground. I guess it's possible to put some kind of signal booster on a tracking device, but it's likely that even with a stronger signal it still cannot be traced underground. We may not need to know the path that it takes underground, just where it re-emerges, at which point it would have a chance to reconnect to the cellular network and regain adequate GPS signal, if it ever does. The thing with underground caves that hold water is that the water might circulate, but not very fast, and not all of it at the same time. So the GPS tracker could get stuck somewhere, has its battery run out and then not even appear on the surface somewhere, or it could, but USTLL wouldn't find it because its battery is dead. The article says that the water is just coming back out underneath the water. According to the measurements they took, there is so water volume loss before and after the falls, meaning half the water isn't mysteriously disappearing. That article said they were going to do another dye test in fall of 2017, which has since passed. I did a quick Google search and didn't see any results of this test. All of the recent articles were in early 2017 just announcing the new theory. I wonder if they ever solved this mystery. Tip webpage. Seems likely not to actually occur. Was decided not to be important enough to confirm. I find the murder of Meredith Kirker fascinating to read about. Is Amanda Knox guilty? Initially yes. Now number. Who actually did it? Will we ever find out? Also the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. The murder of Noreen Jaslin. TLDR. One of the worst unsolved murder cases involved an 8-year-old girl who died in 2007. Her dismembered body was found in a suitcase over 10 kilometers, 8 miles, away from where she was last seen on camera. What the perpetrators did to her body was unimaginably horrifying, and the case remains unsolved today due to the fact that the CCTV that captured the moment she was kidnapped was too blurry to make out the vehicle license plate. Murder of Noreen Jaslin. Wikipedia webpage. I remember this case well when it came out during my middle school years. The newspapers and radio spoke about it for a full month. I live not far from the exact spot where she vanished, and it gives me the creeps that whoever did this is still out there, possibly plotting to find another victim. I always wondered what the point of having a security camera is when everything is blurred to shit. Spring-heeled Jack. Spring-heeled Jack. Wikipedia webpage. Theories. Is a mystery that has always stood out to me. At this point, a lot has been contributed to Spring-heeled Jack that has turned him into more of an urban legend than anything. But, the original reports are very fascinating. The Texas killing fields. Tons of dead women have been found around this field off of I-45 in Houston. There's even a movie about them. Texas killing fields. Location. Wikipedia webpage. These threads are bad for productivity and for people who are home alone. The Codex Gigas. Supposedly the Devil's Bible. It's been mysteriously saved multiple times from burning buildings. For example, it was chucked out of burning building from the 4th floor or something. But the catch is that a single person can't carry it. It weighs several hundred pounds and no one was in the building. Nobody knows where it's been originated. Also, it's reported that there's evidence in the handwriting and ink that the entire book was written within a very short period of time, like a week or something. But the book is huge, should have taken years to write. Really interesting stuff. Edit. Also, as someone mentioned, according to analysis, it seems as though the entire book was written by one monk. Ice skating. Science has only observed the phenomenon, but cannot properly describe how it works. There are a few competing theories. From Wikipedia. Physical mechanics of skating. Edit. A skate can glide over ice because there is a layer of ice molecules at the surface that are not as tightly bound as the molecules of the mass of ice beneath. These molecules are in a semi-liquid state, providing lubrication. The molecules in this quasi-fluid or water-like layer are less mobile than liquid water, but are much more mobile than the molecules deeper in the ice. At about 250 degrees F, 157 degrees C, the slippery layer is one molecule thick. As the temperature increases, the slippery layer becomes thicker. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. It had long been believed that ice is slippery because the pressure of an object in contact with it causes a thin layer to melt. The hypothesis was that the blade of an ice skate, exerting pressure on the ice, melts a thin layer, providing lubrication between the ice and the blade. This explanation, called pressure melting, originated in the 19th century. This, however, did not account for skating on ice temperatures lower than 3.5 degrees C, whereas skaters often skate on lower temperature ice. In the 20th century, an alternative explanation, called friction heating, was proposed, whereby friction of the material was causing the ice layer melting. However, the theory also failed to explain skating at low temperature. In fact, neither explanation explained why ice is slippery when standing still even at below zero temperatures. 19. Ice skating. Wikipedia web page. This is a delightful unsolved mystery compared to the rest of this thread. The disappearance of Karen Horman. Wikipedia web page. Back in 2010 in Portland, Karen shows up for school, science project in hand. He displays his project at the Skyline Elementary Science Fair, and is not seen afterwards. He isn't seen getting on the bus and he is reported missing when his dad doesn't see him get off. It's reported that Karen's stepmother, Terry Horman, was seen in her pickup at the school after the science fair, but after many years and multiple investigations, Karen hasn't been found and nobody has been deemed responsible. His name is heavy out here. I'll definitely remember it for the rest of my life. This is significantly less creepy than the other things here, but I'm going to go with a Cryptos Wikipedia web page. Sculpture at the CIA headquarters. The sculpture was created in 1990 by Jim Sanborn and consists of 4 parts. The first 3 parts were decrypted in 1993, but the 4th part remains a mystery 25 years later. It's gotten worldwide attention from cryptanalysts, but it still hasn't been solved. The odd thing is that Sanborn doesn't have much of a background in code breaking or cryptanalytics, yet he still created a code that has stumped the best experts in the world. I'm surprised no one has mentioned the miracle of Fatima. There is a whole lot to the story and 3 sisters it revolves around, but a short excerpt about it. The miracle of the sun. Portuguese. O Milagre do Sol, also known as the miracle of Fatima, refers to an event that allegedly occurred on the 13th of October 1917 above a large crowd who had gathered near Fatima, Portugal, in response to prophecy made by 3 shepherd children. The prophecy was that the Virgin Mary, referred to as Our Lady of Fatima, would appear and perform miracles on that date. Newspapers published testimony from reporters and other people who claimed to have witnessed extraordinary solar activity, such as the sun appearing to dance or zigzag in the sky, careen towards the earth, or emit multicolored light and radiant colors. According to these reports, the event lasted approximately 10 minutes. Estimates of the number of people range from 30-40k all the way up to 100k. Yet this amazing event wasn't observed anywhere else in the world outside of Fatima, Portugal. There is also a cryptic aspect to the story where supposedly the Virgin Mary revealed a secret about the end of the world to the sisters that they never told anyone except for the Pope. D.B. Cooper. In 1971, some guy nobody knew walked into an airport, gave fake identification and proceeded to board the plane. Mid-flight he revealed he had a bomb and asked for a ransom. When the plane landed he was given $50,000 cash, 3 parachutes and a flight to Mexico, just between Oregon and Washington. He jumped out, deployed the parachutes and was never seen again. The Lost Empire of Yam. Existing at the same time as the Old Kingdom of Egypt, we have records of merchants who visited it, but no consensus on where it was located. It was rich, powerful, and well known to the neighboring kingdoms. Here's my research that I did into this mystery YouTube webpage. I'd have to say the case of the radioactive pedophile. Can't link a source right now, but I'll try to come back later and add it. Just the whole thing smelled shady to me. Authorities were very adamant on letting the public know how dangerous he was, that he was radioactive from just having chemotherapy, and I was like, how can this guy be on the run from police while battling cancer and needing chemo? The pedophile label seemed haphazardly stuck on him, almost as if they were like, we really need to catch this guy, so we have to alert the public. What will make people want to look for and turn this guy in? We'll say he's a pedophile, and just as suddenly as this story hit the news, it was gone. No updates. Don't know if they caught him. Don't know if he's still out there. Just nothing. As if it was just some weird anomalous blurb, and then it wasn't. It sounded like something out of Stranger Things, or a movie about a human being who manifested weird powers and the government was trying to catch him, so they told the public he was radioactive and a pedophile. Like I said, the weirdest thing to me was that nothing ever came of it. It just disappeared. Edit. Founded, radioactive pedophile on the run. Belfast Telegraph Co. UK webpage. Correction. It wasn't cancer, it was radiation therapy for a thyroid condition. The Cliddock murders. Who really murdered Mary WPC's lesbian lover? Daily Mail online webpage. So there was 4 people murdered in a house in South Wales. 3 generations of the same family. The murderer has been in prison for like 10 years now, but has never pleaded guilty, even though he would be in a much better situation now if he had. No evidence other than a gold chain of his was found at the scene, but this wasn't weird because one of his victims was his lover, Mandy. Mandy had been having a lesbian relationship with a policeman's wife, and it's widely believed that the policeman was the true suspect. The policeman also had a twin brother on the force who worked on the case. I and many others believe it was a massive stitch-up. There are a lot of details I haven't included but are in the link I've provided. Thought this was a very interesting case mystery, or whatever you want to call it. Any more questions I'd be happy to answer, provided you read the article first. David Paulides. He's a retired detective who spends his time revisiting cases of mysterious disappearances, most notably in national parks. Some of the cases he talks about are extremely unnerving. For example, there's cases of children who go missing and later found. Unfortunately, some dead, in an area of the park that's just simply impossible to get to even if you are an experienced hiker. I'd recommend listening to his Missing 411 podcasts on YouTube. There's several interviews of him talking about each of his cases. I'll say one that hasn't been mentioned yet. Disappearance of Bryce Laspisa. Forgive me if I mess some of this up. He was driving back home long distance from college. His parents called police after he should have returned. The police pinged his phone and found he had been just sitting in his car for hours on the side of the road. They checked his car and found no weapons and nothing suspicious, so they let him off. He said he would go home soon. Police followed him for a while to check what he was doing and he seemed to be driving normal, so they went back. Traffic cameras caught him driving on the same road several times, so he was going in circles. Next thing police found, he drove his car off of maybe 100-foot high cliff. They found his blood on the steering wheel, probably where he hit his head. Yet he was nowhere to be seen. Sniffer dogs tracked his scent to a truck stop and lost the scent from there. He hasn't been seen since. Flight 19. Wikipedia webpage. 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on the 5th of December, 1945 after losing contact during a training mission. Barry and Hannah Sherman. Fairly recent. Both found dead. No explained cause of death. Beloved in the community. Really odd and no leads. There was a teenager who went missing. His car was found like 2 weeks later with a pair of lips drawn on the back windshield, and a newborn puppy inside. A more detailed account is what makes it interesting, but I can't remember it exactly and don't remember the kid's name. Zeb Quinn. Wikipedia webpage. Jason Owens has been charged, but Quinn's body has never been found. The puppy was later adopted by one of the investigators. Oh, thank God. Hwaseong serial murders. South Korean serial killer who killed in the late 80s to early 90s. What I find particularly fascinating is how until 2015, South Korea had statute of limitation of murders of 15 years. So the killer would have been able to come forward in 2006 and nothing would have happened to him. Wikipedia webpage. And nothing would have happened to him. Surely the family members of the victims would respect the law and not seek vigilante justice. Who killed John Bennett Ramsey? The circumstantial evidence points to a family member, likely her mother or brother. But all family members were conclusively cleared by DNA testing. So many things in the investigation were botched that we'll probably never know. The deeper you look at the case, the more theories you can come up with. Usually more evidence narrows the suspects, but in this case the volume of evidence expands the pool of possibilities. I think the strongest theory is that the brother, Burke, killed her by accident. The mother was an ex-pageant queen and favored John Bennett over Burke. This caused him to be jealous of her. Previously he had hit John Bennett with a golf club when she had done something to annoy him. Burke was given a late-night snack of pineapple and milk, but John Bennett stole a piece out of his bowl, which is why it's found in his stomach and just the mother and Burke's fingerprints found in the bowl. Burke is annoyed at John Bennett and not thinking about consequences, just out of frustration, hits John Bennett with a mag light which was found on the scene. The parents had lost their first kid in a car accident and feared that if they told the police that Burke killed John Bennett, they'd lose all of their children. So they contact the chief of police, or sheriff, something of that sort, explain what really happened, and they all agree to come up with the fake kidnapping scenario. The mystery of Oak Island. Island off the east coast of Canada that has a large hole or shaft presumed to be many things. Templar treasure, lost works of Shakespeare, etc. No one has ever gotten to the bottom of the pit and it is booby-trapped. It's crazy to me that something can be there for decades unknown but never fully analyzed. Many will disagree with my reasoning, but the Belemere UFO hoax, it's pretty obvious it wasn't real. But to think about the lengths the man went to make his intricate narrative is interesting. Did his apparent motivations make any sense? How many people protected his secrets? Why did some parts of his story fool so many people, and other parts so ridiculous? In many ways it's an obvious story. A guy has an idea and takes it too far. The events themselves aren't unexplained, but he is a strange, mysterious, fascinating story by himself. I just found out about it very recently, but the whole saga and mystique around the Lake City acquired pills and the assassination of Mahmoud al-Mabhouh is enthralling. It's still going on, with LCQP having hidden subreddits and new messages as recent as a month ago. It's so interesting, especially because no one really knows what it all means. The 1996 Route 29 stalker in Virginia. My mom was flagged down by this guy and didn't stop. They found the first body in an orchard my family used to hunt deer in. Sad stuff that hits home. The 2003 theft, then disappearance of a Boeing 727 Wikipedia webpage. Always been interesting to me because of how big of an airplane it is. Like, yes, small G8 planes have gone missing over the years and never found. But something as big as a 727 is just weird. The most reasonable explanation is that the plane probably crashed into the ocean, hence why it hasn't been found. But there have been massive resources put into the incident and they've literally found no trace of it at all. Generally, if a plane that large were to crash in the ocean, they'd at least have some idea. But it's just as likely, based on the evidence they've found, quite literally nothing, that it landed in the desert as it did in the ocean. Also, while it's feasible to figure out how to fly one with just basic flying skills, looking at guides, videos and knowing the basic limits of the airplane, starting up a plane like that and successfully getting it into the air with one person. The other guy who stole the plane had zero flying experience, who from what I've read had only flown small single props. Makes it even more interesting. Astronomer here. In my field, the wow signal Wikipedia webpage is probably the most famous unexplained mystery. It was basically detected in 1977 by a telescope that was just pointed overhead, and looked very similar to what a SETI signal is expected to look like. It was first noted the next morning by an astronomer, who wrote "wow" in the log margins, and was never seen again despite extensive follow-up over the years. There have been various suggestions on what the wow signal was, but no, it probably wasn't comets. No, the wow signal was probably not caused by comets. And Ramida 321 webpage. Personally, based on my experience with man-made interference, RFI, in radio astronomy, I wrote a paper on distinguishing a real transient signal from that stuff. It was most likely RFI from a satellite or similar, but until we see another signal like it, we just don't know for sure, and that's very fun to think about. Cicada 3301. I find this very entertaining and I wish someone will figure it out or they will send another puzzle. Actually, there was a kid who solved it and talked about it. He was working on a program for journalists that was basically a dead man switch where if they didn't reset it, their findings would be sent out. And then the journalists hatched a plan to kill him so they could cover the story. Classic. If I remember correctly, one of the guys who solved it said that he got invited to a chat room composed of previous winners and they received commands off Cicada to build a program or something. I don't remember if they managed to finish the project, but eventually they left the chat room. Brings together a bunch of people after having them solve month-long riddles and encryption puzzles. Has them enter a chat room. Okay guys, so I have this idea for an app. Allegedly people have figured it out. They have posted things such as, common name, is highly intelligent, which while not official seems to indicate that person figured it out. People did figure it out, but the people behind the puzzle were butthurt that people collaborated, so they removed the final message. I find it comical that the creator of such an elusive, mysterious and elaborate puzzle could get butthurt over something like that. Hahaha. What's wild to me is that physical clues to the puzzle were scattered literally all over the world in a very short amount of time. Cali, Nick, Florida, Arkansas, Poland, Spain, Mexico, Australia, and more. I don't remember the guy's name, but there was airport security footage of him entering the airport with his luggage. A few minutes later, it shows him hauling ass out to there without luggage and he was never heard from again. I'm late to the party, but I'll share something I posted on a thread like this a couple of years ago in case somebody is still interested. No break space. Ghost ships have always fascinated me. They're not necessarily that unsettling if you consider people might just have left the ships, taken hostage by pirates or something. But this is the story of the Dutch SS Meeden. Ships off the coast of Malaysia received some SOS messages from SS Meeden. All officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. Before anyone could get to the ship, another SOS message was sent from the ship. I die. The American merchant ship Silver Star was first on scene. Quickly boarding the now drifting ship, they found the whole crew dead, eyes wide open with terrified expression on their faces and arms stretching out in front of them as to shield themselves from something. The radio operator was found dead, sighting by the Morse sending key. Eyes wide open as well. No one on the ship looked physically hurt. As the Silver Star tried to tow the ship back to port, the SS Meeden started smoldering and sunk short thereafter. Disappearance of Madeleine McCann. I wouldn't say it's the best. It's a mystery that no one seems to be able to solve. The issue of the butcher's knife imprint on the wall. Project's Toronto Star webpage. 18-year-old Evan Jones was acting out at home and his mom called the cops. What ensued was an unfortunate use of lethal force wherein the teen was killed at the hands of police. What nobody has been able to explain, however, is just how exactly a literal fucking imprint of the butcher's knife the teen was holding ended up in the wall of the living room. Mom straight up cut out that section of wall and kept it because that shit's seriously distracting when you're trying to watch TV. Edit. Killed instead of murdered for objectivity's sake. Update. For those who think it would be so easy to press a large butcher's knife into drywall and leave an imprint, I don't buy it for several reasons, all of which would have to be successful in a specific order for this to occur. First of all, he'd have to have the intention of doing such a thing. In his drunken and unstable state, this may be a stretch, or maybe not. Don't know about you, but I could give two flying hot dogs about the lack of decor on the walls whenever I've been in one of my drunken rages, but that's just me. I've never been in a drunken rage. But the execution of it, now that's where it goes downhill. To make such an imprint would require more than a simple push. I don't care how soft the drywall is, it's not fucking SpongeBob. That cleaver would need to be slammed into the wall. Next, it would have to be slammed into the wall at an exact angle and pressure to elicit the imprint shown, while also taking care not to fucking stab yourself or slice your hands. How exactly a drunken incoherent teenager manages to coordinate all of these things precisely, and in this order, near the tank of his pet gecko no less, is beyond comprehension. At least, I still think so. Not the best but quite interesting if you ask me. The Green Children of Woolpit. Basically, two greenish colored children, who speaks an unknown language and only ate beans for months, being found by farmers. One is dead after a few months but the other one, girl, learned how to speak English and her greenish skin turned into normal color, and married with an ambassador. She later told that she and her brother were trying to find their father's flock, and went into a cave. Then they came out to the place where the farmers found them. I just love stories like this, although they don't hear any convincing. In 1994 a woman was stabbed over 30 times to the face and body in her home. Her apartment, which needed to be buzzed into access, was literally in between a church and a police station. They found her body 2 weeks later because someone complained of the smell. Nothing on cameras and no DNA evidence was ever found. Best unexplained mystery to me because it was my mother. The UFO phenomenon being real, as recently confirmed by the Pentagon's AATIP program. Nighttime's webpage. TLDR. They told the public that aircraft of unknown origins with capabilities that are incomprehensible to known physics are regularly infringing on our airspace and there's nothing we can do about it. Operating with no apparent means of lift or thrust, even underwater. And they seem to turn off our nukes whenever they want. Also, I guess they're storing material recovered from UFOs at some building owned by Bigelow Aerospace. I was going to say this one. What's nuts is that this wasn't a bigger story. One of the largest newspapers in the USA, with a large national and international readership, broke a story confirmed by members of the Air Force with documented video evidence demonstrating an aerial phenomenon that we cannot explain. And yet, nothing. It's nice to know someone else felt this way. My wife said something about it and expressed shock that no one seemed to care. I thought she must have been exaggerating until I looked into it. They are examining metal found with properties they cannot explain. Really absurd stuff. Incredible when a story like this hits Net and BBC front page. It sends chills down my spine. While the skeptic in me assumes it's still some top secret technology being veiled under this conspiracy, it's really interesting to think about. Really messes with my mind to think of a breaking headline across magazines, papers, websites, and blown up on social media. Breaking news. We are not alone. Extraterrestrials confirmed unanimously by all UN Security Council nations. Followed by live footage of some astonishing footage. Panic. Excitement. Unity. Man. It would be crazy times. Some guy I was listening to on YouTube suggested it might be what they call a soft disclosure. That may have not been the exact term, but regardless, it was something similar. Basically they just try to ease the public into it. Like get people acclimated to the idea a bit at a time rather than aliens here now everyone panic. One day, perhaps decades from now, I'm just gonna wake up one morning and find a UFO took my parking spot. It's crazy to me that the news media hasn't made a bigger deal out of this. A farmer sees some lights in the sky and it's national news, yet when the Pentagon comes out and says look, there are things flying around up there and we have no idea what the hell they are. Oh, also here's video evidence of one and no one seems to even care. It's wild. To the top with this. At first blush this is just the usual blurry UFO video. However, it was released by the government. Multiple pilots reported seeing it. People highly trained in their ability to report their sightings accurately. Radar was tracking fleets of these objects. There are reports of materials recovered from these things by people who previously led the program, and a whole host of other interesting bits and pieces which look likely to be revealed not too long from now. I know JFK assassination is too typical, but I still think about it and it's goddamn crazy. You can say it was a setup. FBI and USA government were involved, but we'll never know the truth. My understanding was that there totally was a conspiracy to hide the monumental mistakes made by the FBI and the Secret Service. Edit. So, to clarify my point, my understanding was that the FBI knew that Oswald was whacked, had access to guns, and was making commentary that could lead to an assassination attempt. The monumental fuck-up was that they did nothing about it, and allowed JFK to be assassinated. Now, whether you believe it was an on-purpose mistake or a simple failure, the FBI did classify a whole bunch of documents that proved that they knew it could be an issue. Those documents were just declassified recently. Any of the cases on the missing 411 books. Toddlers found 25 miles away from home but naked in winter, in great condition just a few hours after disappearing. People vanishing into thin air in our national parks, most of them with large groups. Kids disappearing from their backyard after being outside for only a minute and never found again. Super crazy. The most mysterious was a man who was a world-class climber who disappeared off his rappel line on the side of Mount Rainier. His friend said his line went slack and he was gone. Search helicopters with infrared searched the entire mountain and base of the mountain and he hasn't been found to this day. I've been climbing for a little while now, and one of the most common causes of death in climbing is people simply rappelling off the end of their rappel lines. Typically, you want to tie stop knots at the end of the line to prevent this, but sometimes people get lazy forget. I'd imagine, since they found his pack, he likely rapped off his line, causing it to go slack, fell to the ground, then tried walking to safety, likely succumbed to the elements and was picked apart by wildlife. The Tamar Shud case. A man is found dead on a beach in Australia in 1948. His spleen was 3 times its normal size and there was internal damage to various of his organs. However, none of these things were necessarily fatal and cause of death was unclear. Poisoning is suspected, but his stomach only contained half a pasty. There was also no evidence of vomiting or convulsions. So it's not just that the poison would have left no trace, it also left no understanding of the mechanism. His dental records match no living person. All the labels have been cut off of his clothes and to this day we have no idea who he was. Witnesses suggest the man got a train and then a bus from Adelaide to the vicinity of the beach. It then appears he walked to the beach, although his shoes looked freshly polished and had no signs of the dust one would expect if this was the case. Retracing his steps, investigators found a suitcase in the left luggage office of Adelaide Station. The suitcase contained several fresh changes of clothes but no socks, all with the name T. Keane sewn into them. No man by the name of T. Keane has ever been identified in connection to this case. A further investigation found that someone had sewn a tiny rolled up piece of paper into the hem of the dead man's trousers. The rolled up piece of paper said Tamam Shud. Tamam Shud are the final words of the poem Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam and mean it is ended in Persian. Forensic investigation demonstrates that this piece of paper was cut from a very rare copy of the Rubaiyat, of which there were only known to be 6 copies in Australia. The copy from which these words were cut then turns up having been thrown into the backseat of a man's car. Police took out a court order to hide the man's identity and would only reveal that he was a doctor. That copy had these words impressed into the back cover, as though they had been written on the sheet torn out. Rgobabt, Mliaoi. Wutbimpenet. Nliaboyak. Idm Samskap. The copy also had a phone number in the front. The phone number belonged to a woman named Jessica Thompson, who owned one of the other only 6 copies of the Rubaiyat. Thompson had given her copy to a man, who may or may not have been a spy, called Alf Boxall. Police therefore assumed Boxall to be the missing man, but when they went to look for him they found him alive and well and his copy of the Rubaiyat intact. In something like 70 years of trying, police have been unable to find any link between the dead man and Boxall or Thompson. However, Thompson's grandson was born with a rare genetic ear deformity which the missing man also had. Apparently, Stephen Paddock's motive: Vegas shooter. It's been several months and we still have no idea what motivated him to do what he did. No manifesto, no hints from relatives, nothing. This has sparked several conspiracy theorists to come up with explanations, but I suspect he just was a very private person and we will never know. The death of Edgar Allan Poe. Wikipedia webpage. Poe was found wandering the streets of Baltimore on the 3rd of October, 1849. He was brought to hospital, where he died 4 days later on the 7th. He was never lucid enough to tell anyone what had happened to him. Even the cause of his death isn't known for sure. The last reliable sighting of Poe before the 3rd of October was on the 27th of September, when he left his home to go to New York. I recommend reading the Wikipedia article. It is truly interesting. Reddit mystery. Lake Sitaquad pills. Lake Sitaquad pills. Strange Reddit mystery that started 4 years ago. Post from our Out of the Loop RBI webpage. A short and personal one. We have a grand old clock hanging on our wall. Wooden box and big pendulum, with a deer antler on top. It was a gift from my grandfather, mother's father, as he grew up on a deer farm in Germany. My mum's German. He had some health complications and ended up being diagnosed with some form of cancer. I was very little so can't remember what, but was seemingly doing okay in hospital with treatment. One night my mum woke up with a cold feeling at about 2 AM English time, and took her ages to get back to sleep. First thing that morning her mum rang to tell her that my grandfather had passed on during the night, time of death being 2 AM English time. As we went downstairs, we noticed that his big clock had stopped at 2 AM. First time in 40 plus years at least that it had stopped. We've been trying to get it fixed a few times since and it will always work for a few days, maybe a few weeks, but eventually it will stop again at 2 AM. It's my own little family mystery. The Belize Ripper that mutilated and raped at least 7 girls between the ages of 9 to 15 years old and was never caught in. Belize City YouTube webpage. They shouldn't ignore expats when looking for that murderer. The gifts and money the victims were receiving are a big tip-off. I met an old expat on Cape Corker that seemed very casual in talking about how you could hire underage girls in Belize City. So casual he talked about it right in front of his wife. I'm not saying I think it was him, but I think sex tourism there is more common than one might think. Not so much an established mystery, but I hear a lot of stories from different places about the corn monster. A lot of people who grew up near cornfields describe some kind of presence in them you don't want to fuck with. Stories range from something whistling back to you to being chased by it. For me, it is the Nazca lines in Peru. Giant line drawings that are really only visible from a high altitude, like in a helicopter or plane. They were made a long time before the technology to observe them from heights of a couple of 100 feet were possible. I've never understood this mystery. The Inca and most other cultures had gods who lived in the sky. Why do we assume the drawings were made with the intent that they be observed by men? And then, in a poetic act of ignorance and irony, Greenpeace fucked them up apparently. Drone footage shows extent of damage from Greenpeace stunt at Nazca Lines, Vice webpage. Since it's local, the face that appeared at University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, TX. It appeared on one of the stone panels on the outside of the building. UT maintenance power blasted the panel, and the face reappeared in another location on the facade. They literally cannot get rid of it. I've seen it and it's kinda unnerving. Link, untitled webpage. Why do sleep? All we know so far is because we're tired, but all else is a mystery. As for crime, who was the original Night Stalker hysteria rapist? Wikipedia webpage. Was he also the Visalia and Saka? Wikipedia webpage. From years before? Just stumbled upon the Aaron's case 2 days ago and my production at work has been shot as I've been completely enthralled, absorbing every possible detail and theory on this case. It's a shame that it's not more publicly known since this is one of the most prolific criminals in history and there's still time to bring him to justice with the help of the public. To answer your question, I absolutely believe that the Visalia and Saka was also Aaron's as he perfected his craft in the early days. The profile and demo just fits too well. For anyone remotely interested in true crime, I cannot recommend this case enough. 80+ hot prowl burglaries, 50 rapes, 12 murders, and the list goes on. Maybe sleeping is our natural state and we wake up only to do all we have to in order to survive and reproduce. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. He killed at least 12 vagabond hobos in Cleveland's Depression-era railroad shanty town. Elliot Ness was investigating these murders at the time, and the taunting letters sent by the killer really messed with his head. Cleveland's torso murderer. Wikipedia webpage. The Pentagon Papers. What happened to the missing trillions that were discovered on the 10th of September, 2001? David Crowley and his family's murder. No, I'm not a conspiracy theorist that believes he was murdered by the government. I'd really recommend the doc A Grey State. It examines a lot of the possibilities but it's just so fucking creepy and bizarre. Edit. Guess I should add a brief recap. Guy was an Iraq vet and pretty hardcore libertarian, as well as conspiracy guy, who was making a movie called Grey State. Essentially this may happen 20 years from now about the government taking over the country. Spends 2 years and thousands of dollars making a proof of concept trailer. Raises a bunch of money to make a feature film. Does shoot a bunch of it. Then basically starts to go nuts. He has tons of footage of him just wearing military stuff and holding a gun in his basement yelling generic phrases. Then there's this footage of his daughter, who was also murdered, talking about the red man coming in and there's gonna be blood on the walls and ceiling. This is probably the creepiest part. This continues. Wife claims to be experiencing paranormal voices after the two of them get involved in weird spiritual shit. Then, a few days after Christmas, a neighbor notices Christmas presents still sitting on the porch, goes over to the window and sees the 3 dead bodies, as well as Allah Akbar written in his wife's blood on the wall. Dude was nuts. Believed the movie he was making was actually his real life. He tried his best to make his movie into his life, and even alludes to gotta make yourself the story in the end or something along those lines. Can't recall his exact words. Full stop. His wife also is just doing anything to try to cope with him. She wants to believe him and believe in him so badly she jumps on any bandwagon that supports his crazy ideas. You can see her in the end when she's talking about her paranormal experiences that she's saying these things while staring at him waiting for his response. When he agrees she's happy. She's seeking his approval. His stress levels rise as he fails to find an ending for his movie. He gets depressed. They interview people saying he went to his dark place, etc. He's got this giant wall outlining his plot, with push pins and strings connecting everything. His plot gets more and more convoluted and he can't get to an ending. In the end, he solidifies his attempts to turn his life into that movie and gives his movie an ending by ending his and his family's lives. His movie was basically Infire's stuff put into a dystopian future. He even finds Alex Jones and talks to him, talking him up the whole time. What's mysterious about it? Guy goes nuts, kills family in the name of warn them what will happen or whatever. The man from Tord. To quickly summarize, this guy had a passport for a non-existent country called Tord. He was picked up by authorities in Japan, I believe, using a fake passport from Tord. When shown a globe, he pointed to where it's supposed to be but it wasn't there. He became visibly freaked out and authorities confiscated his belongings and put him in a guarded room overnight until they figure out if any crime was committed. His room was guarded by 2 armed guards, and his things were in evidence bags at the police station. When checked on the next morning, he had disappeared from his locked guarded room. To make things even weirder, his belongings disappeared from the highly secure evidence room at the station. So fascinating. I personally think our reality could overlap others from time to time and people and things can slip through until reality realizes it fucked up and corrects itself. Edit. Was unaware this is entirely a made-up story at the time of posting, so trolls can now STF you please. It most likely never happened. The story can be tracked to a book about mysteries released in 1950s. No contemporary documentation exists. I'd say there's no reason to believe it is anything more than a fictional story. Edit. I misremembered. It was the Directory of Possibilities released in 1981. For better or worse, this is the likely answer to a lot of mysteries. Someone writes up a well-detailed story of some very creepy and mysterious event, and lets it go to see how far it travels. It's full of place names, usually remote, people's names, dates, and other details, the credibility of which is transferred, in people's minds, to the fictional events. I can understand how some individuals might think it fun to launch a story and see if it comes back to them from another source years later. There is no official document or statement delivered by the Japanese authorities. The whole mystery comes from a single source and has been quoted multiple times over time. And more telling, the author of the original article detailing this strange man never spoke of it again. I think this is an urban myth, for something that happened in the 1950s and was so suspicious. You'd think there would be some kind of official record, perhaps someone still alive who remembers it. Nobody has ever been able to produce any kind of hard evidence. Circleville writer. Woman started getting anonymous letters asking her to confess to having an affair with the superintendent of schools in the area. Letters increased in frequency and became more threatening. After a while, they seemed to stop, then started again one day. Someone phoned her house. Her husband picked up and claimed to know who was writing the letters and left the house with his gun. They found his car crashed. He was dead. His gun had fired 2 bullets. His blood alcohol limit was insane. Even though everyone who knew him claims he was not a heavy drinker, letters kept coming in and monuments on her bus route started popping up that threatened her. One day, she saw a sign saying RIP, her daughter's name. She stopped the bus and tried to tear it off. Luckily, she did it, however she did because it was booby-trapped with a gun to fire at whoever tore it up. The gun's serial number was scratched off, but they did find out it belonged to her brother-in-law. He was sent to jail, despite pleading his innocence, but the letters kept coming to her and even to him. He was eventually released and used the internet to put up all the details to get others to help solve it. I think up until 2001, they were still being sent to her, her family and wider residents of Circleville. The writer even sent a message to Unsolved Mysteries warning them against going after the local sheriff who was accused of helping to cover up the person doing it or trying to lower reported crime rates to profit from funding. I still find myself thinking about the Elisa Lam death quite often. She was caught on a hotel camera doing some very strange things before disappearing, and was later found in the hotel's water tank. The whole thing was really creepy. Edit. Here's an archived link from our Unsolved Mysteries about the case. Resolved. Elisa Lam. Long. Link heavy. Unresolved Mysteries webpage. TLDR. Elisa Lam was diagnosed with mental health issues, and Yuhami Sami makes a good case that she was exhibiting signs of manic episode in surveillance footage around the time of her disappearance. This one was supposedly solved. Apparently the latches to the water tanks were not that heavy. The odd behavior was because she was off her medicine for a mental illness. Forget what one. That is a creepy video, but what's there to think about? We now know that it was a mentally ill person having an episode. Not sure if it is warranted as being a mystery. What happened to Linton and Barnstaple Railway locomotive Luke ? After the closure of the L&B, she went to Brazil, where all records of her were lost. One report said she worked at a sugar mill for less than a year before being sent to Argentina for work in a lumber yard, while most believe she stayed at the sugar mill and was scrapped in 1939. Who the fuck Tommy Wiseau is? Nobody knows how old he is, where he's from, or how he seemed to have appeared from nowhere with millions of dollars and buying up real estate in La and San Francisco. If I had to guess, he made his money illicitly during the collapse of the USSR, during the rapid privatization, and he got into trouble and took his money and fled, and needed to launder it somehow. That would have all happened in the early mid-90s, which would set him up in time for The Room to be produced. Roanoke Colony, Wikipedia webpage, Lost Colony. Yeah, I always thought this wasn't that much of a mystery. The colonists were told by John White to carve Maltese cross on a tree indicating they were forced to leave. There was no Maltese cross. However, there was a nearby island called Croton Island. White understood that to mean that's where the colonists had gone, but he was never able to make it to the island to check. In the 17th century, European colonists reportedly came across gray-eyed American Indians who claimed they were descended from the Roanoke colonists. Isn't it pretty much believed known that they assimilated with local Native American tribes? Wasn't the answer to that pretty obvious? Croton. They wrote Croton on a tree, and the local Croton Indians showed up with suspiciously blue-eyed babies when the colony was checked up on. We don't know why ice is slippery. We used to teach that adding pressure melts a tiny bit of the top layer. Pressure does raise the freezing point, but it's still slippery if you apply too little pressure for this effect to be significant. And it's still slippery way below the freezing point. It's not just that it's very smooth, either. Smooth glass isn't slippery. Dartmouth Undergraduate Journal of Science webpage WNCNP page 7 car. Water makes ice slippery and not just from pressure melting. Anyone from northern Canada will tell you that ice that very cold and isn't wet when stepped on with broad boots is actually not very slippery. There's also a mystery about a guy who left one day to get milk or something at the store and never returned. About 40 years later, a man appeared in front of a police officer in the middle of the street in New York City. He became terrified and ran into traffic. got hit and died. His clothes were pristine from decades before. His money was old and he had a locket in his pocket. Anyways, years later an investigator tracked down his daughter, elderly by then but never forgot about her dad's disappearance, and finally got an answer. As weirder it sounds, her father seemingly randomly time traveled and died. There's full stories about it but I'm lazy and at work. This was actually a science fiction story turned urban legend. Rudolph Fentz, Wikipedia webpage. How does nitrous, i.e., laughing gas, work? You exhale almost all of it, 98%, and no one understands how it really works, just that it does. A lot of medicine boils down to informed instrumentalism. Look, we've confirmed that this particular compound has these desirable effects with these maximally minimized side effects within these dosage parameters. We don't really know why it be like it is, but it do. Unsolved Dyatlov Pass mystery. 9 Soviet hikers who tore through their tents naked in sub-zero temperatures. 7 died of hypothermia. 1 of a fractured skull. 1 female team member had her tongue and eyes missing. Official cause of death unknown. Compelling force. YouTube webpage. Avalanche followed by hypothermia and paradoxical undressing. Hypothermia. Wikipedia webpage. Paradoxical undressing. Gravity. All life on Earth experiences it continually. We've known about its basic properties for centuries. We've known more or less how it works on the macro level for about 100 years. We have no idea how it works on anything other than that scale. I'd have to take 2 shots at this. 1. Why does your average depiction of a grey alien, Google it, trigger some sort of primal fear reaction? Almost universally across different people too. The sheer number of random people around internet recounting their personal experiences with paranormal, seeing a UFO, a ghost, hearing or dreaming paranormal shit. There's no way 100.00% of literal millions of cases can be easily rationally explained away, can it? My best guess is that there's a default mind map of a face, and when our brain sees a template or something extremely close, it freaks out, and seeing that default mind map should be reasonably possible given a mess up or random misfire.